The shoe was stuck in the iron bars and would not leave its new shelter. Emily even cursed, looked around and freed her foot from the temporary trap. The shoe was still in place, so she crouched down and began to pull the unfortunate shoe, trying not to scratch the heel. She was going to meet a very important person, from whose gaze such a detail as a spoiled shoe would not be hidden. It was better not to risk it. The iron bars clamped down on the heel like an angry bull terrier on a chop. But Emily wasn't used to giving up so easily. She didn't care that she was standing with one foot in the dust, and the sharp stones were tearing her pantyhose. As luck would have it, there was no one around, and she couldn't even ask for help. "I don't care," she shrieked. "Not without spitting on the shoe. You think I can't do it without you? You bet I can, even if I'm barefoot. Can I help you?" A man's voice suddenly sounded above her ear. Emily flinched and turned around. In front of her stood a handsome young man in overalls. Ouch. The girl was confused. "Yes, I could use some help. You see, I'm stuck." The guy, without asking unnecessary questions, deftly extracted the shoe from the trap and handed it to Emily. From the outside, it all looked like a shabby prince offering Cinderella to try on a crystal slipper on a high stiletto. Emily embarrassedly snatched the shoe from the stranger's hands, deftly put it on her foot, and smiled. "You are, you might say, my savior. I was about to say goodbye to her, but then you showed up." "You shouldn't have," laughed the guy. "The shoes are expensive, I can tell. You shouldn't throw it away so easily. Besides, there are no hopeless situations in life. Never give up, even if it seems that everything is lost." "I'll do my best," Emily smiled and waved goodbye to the stranger. It was only a couple houses away from their destination. Emily sped up her steps, as she didn't want to be late. John Smith was already waiting for her in the park's cozy coffee shop at his usual spot. Emily went straight to the man. "Emily, my dear." John got up from the sofa and looked at her from head to toe. "You look beautiful. You always do." "Thank you." Emily blushed slightly. "John, will you excuse me for being late? Was there an emergency?" No, I'm the one who's early." The man hastened to reassure her, but Emily saw the faintest flicker of displeasure in his eyes. "Let's not waste time. I'll show you everything at once." Emily took out of her bag a voluminous catalog and put it in front of her. "Is there anything interesting?" The man perked up immediately. "I think so." Emily nodded. "You know John Smith. I always show everything to you first. You're on our payroll. We just finished the catalog. Sarah Thompson sent me straight to you. A lot of Chinese porcelain this time. As I recall, that's your subject, isn't it?" "Oh yes." John's eyes lit up, and he poured himself greedily into the catalog. "I, of course, more on imperial porcelain. You know what my collection is, but I will not refuse China. And in the price is always growing, and pleasing to the eye. You've seen how filigree always these vases and statuettes are executed." Emily worked in a private gallery, and John was considered one of the biggest art connoisseurs in town. He was an avid collector, investing heavily in antiquities. Emily was his favorite agent, introduced them to Henry Johnson, who devoted his entire life to antiques. John was his longtime friend, and they had once hunted for precious art together. Porcelain was their shared passion. But as Henry grew older, his passion waned because of illness. Grandfather liked Emily's passion for antiquities. When she was a baby, they spent hours in his store. She would gaze breathlessly at the porcelain figurines that reflected the spirit of different eras and peoples. Henry told her a million stories with enthusiasm. This hobby eventually turned into a profession. Emily graduated from the Institute of Culture and received a specialty of restorer. And then, thanks to her grandfather's connections, she began working at the local state gallery. The profession was not monetary, but very interesting. Emily fiddled enthusiastically with reactive special restoration mixtures and literally restored masterpieces, which were about to fall into oblivion. It seemed to her a real miracle. The girl didn't need much money. Her grandfather was a rich man by the standards of the city. He did not drive his favorite granddaughter to work until exhaustion. Emily's passion flattered him. In addition, he was frankly proud that he was able to instill in the girl a love for what he himself valued most of all. But a few years passed, and Emily was offered a promising position in a newly opened private gallery. Its owner, Sarah Thompson, was an old acquaintance of her grandfather, so the career quickly went uphill. Starting as an assistant, Emily quickly settled in and after a year became a senior art historian. She was not only well-versed in art, but also able to find a common language with the most fastidious clients. John Smith was one of them. "Nice selection, John," announced in a high-pitched tone as he closed the catalog. "Can you give me this edition for a couple of days? I can tell you now that I would like to buy a couple of things, but I'd like to look at them in more detail. At my age, moods change dramatically. In case something else catches my fancy. I like to contemplate. Even photographs can sometimes fascinate me enough to make me want to own the original." Of course, the girl nodded. "You only please do not delay, because Sarah Thompson wants to organize an exhibition, a presentation. In 2 months, it is necessary to prepare the exposition. I've already invited so many guests that I feel I won't be able to rest. You know what's on me? You, my girl, don't worry." The man patted her hand. "I'll give you a final answer one of these days. I'll call Sarah myself. I'll tell her what I need to postpone." Emily left the cafe with a sigh of relief. Don't worry about the commission, she told herself. The main thing is to have time to prepare the exposition. Also, the house is a mess. What's wrong? John Smith was worried. Is there anything I can do to help? I can. The girl shook her head. No, it's all right. Just personal problems. It all came together at once. Don't be silent, Emily. If I can help, John Smith offered. Thank you. Okay, I'll leave the catalog. Then I'll call you as soon as I decide. In the meantime, I'm going to run an errand. I'll see you later. Say hi to Grandpa, she said. I'll be sure to tell him. Would you stop by and see him? I rarely get to him, and he's not feeling well. His heart is racing. Emily sighed. Yes, I'm afraid for him, too. Don't worry, my girl, everything will be fine. Emily said goodbye and walked out. There was no more business scheduled for today. Sarah Thompson said to go home right after the meeting. But Emily didn't feel like going home at all. She went to the nearest candy store and bought a couple of air cakes. Holding the brightly colored box tightly, the girl headed toward the house on the waterfront where her grandfather lived. It took a long time for the door to be opened. Emily didn't have her keys. The visit to her grandfather's house had been unplanned. Strangely, she pounded her knuckles on the door anxiously. Where could he have gone? And the phone was silent. He'd forgotten it again. What kind of person knows I worry when he doesn't pick up the phone? Emily was about to leave when Henry finally opened the door. Emily, what a joy. I didn't see that coming. Why did you come without calling? The girl was indignant and hugged her grandfather tightly. You don't answer yourself. I'm worried. Come on, Henry waved her away. I just fell asleep. It happens at my age. I got up early in the morning. Well, that's good, Grandpa. Look what I brought. Emily squinted enigmatically and showed me a box of brownies. I know it's bad for you, but what's life without sweets? That's true, sweetheart, Henry laughed. Let's not eat until 6, or the nurse will be here to give me my shots. If she sees me, I'm in trouble. But we still have 40 minutes, nodded her granddaughter. I'll stay with you for a while, or they'll lose me at home. Tell me, how are you doing? Because you look pale, tired. I'm fine. I've got a lot of work to do. We're getting ready for the new exhibition. I just met John Smith. He says hello to you. He said he'd drop by. John? Henry chuckled. I haven't seen him in a while. He's been away on business. I wish he'd come to see an old friend more often. He's probably looking for something better for himself again. Yeah, they brought in a lot of Chinese porcelain. I handed him the catalog and his eyes lit up. I could tell he had his eye on a couple of pieces. I remember back in the day. I'd like to buy something myself, but what's the point? There's no point in collecting anymore. I don't have much time left. Come on, Grandpa, full of pessimism. You're only 76, you've got a lot of years ahead of you. We have a good heredity. Your father lived to be 100 years old. Are you burying yourself already? It's no big deal if you have a bad heart. It's not a problem with the current level of medicine. The main thing is to take care of yourself. You should come and see me more often. When I see you, I immediately feel young. You have such positive energy. I'd love to, but you know I don't have time. And at home. That witch is driving me crazy again. Alex, why don't you get involved? I would never let my mother treat my wife like that. It's about time you two got your own place. 5 years of marriage and still in the same place. And there's an empty apartment. Alex doesn't want to Emily's side. He says it's your apartment and he's uncomfortable. He's uncomfortable. Henry was indignant. Are you comfortable with her constant nagging? Why does she dislike you so much? I don't know. It was tolerable before, but for the last 6 months she's been going off the rails. It's none of my business, granddaughter. But I think if you want a quiet family life, you should move out. It's only going to get worse. I know that kind of woman. She won't rest until she's completely dried you up. And the kids will come. What then? Grandpa suddenly got serious. Emily, you know that Alex and I can't have children. That's why Lubov Markovna is so mad. She wants grandchildren, and I can't. When she found out that I have such a disorder in my body, she started her attacks. It feels like she's deliberately trying to break us up so that he'll find another woman who'll give birth to an heir. And what an inheritance. All they have behind them is an apartment and a shabby cottage. If I were your mother-in-law, on the contrary, I would protect you. If I die, you'll inherit everything. Grandpa, why do you say that? Emily was upset. John and I love each other. He's never been interested in your money. Well, maybe not to him, but I had the honor of talking to Lubov Markovna. She kept trying to find out the size of my capital. You can't choose your relatives, girl, but to live with them on the same territory is to put nails in your coffin. Come on, we'll be fine, Emily said. I'm at work most of the time, John too. We only see each other in the evenings. And on weekends, Lubov Markovna usually goes either to the country or to her friends. I see how well you're doing. You're not even in a hurry to get home. I'm not in a hurry, because I came to you and want to spend more time here, smiled Emily. So what if your mother-in-law is a witch? Every other family is like that, and they live. I feel sorry for you. Emily. Henry patted her on the head. I just want you to be happy. I am happy. Hugged his granddaughter. I have a man I love, a job I love. I don't need anything else. I just have you all to myself, Henry smiled. My parents have suffered so much in their lives and lost them early. That's what I'm worried about. I understand, Grandpa. Emily poked him on the cheek. But believe me, I'm fine. By the way, you know, I got my heel caught in a grate today, stuck on the sidewalk. Barely made it out. Well, at least there are still some kind people out there. At 6 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. It was the nurse. Emily stayed at her grandfather's house for a short time and went home. It was raining outside. The girl called a cab and in 10 minutes stood at the door to her apartment. Alex was not at home. Emily was even surprised. The clock was already showing the 9th hour. He was usually back by this time. But Lubov Markovna met her on the doorstep. And where do we go? Grumbled unhappily mother-in-law. I was at work, then I slipped off somewhere. And why do you ask? Calmly replied Emily. Where did she get off? I came home, no wife, no wife. And where is he? I thought he hadn't come back yet, Emily wondered. Would you pick up the phone when your husband calls? Maybe I would. Emily looked at the screen of her smartphone, puzzled. I always answer the phone. How can you be so irresponsible? Love boiled. But I don't have any missed calls or messages. Where did he call? To his workplace. I don't take it with me after I leave the gallery. Should you? You're supposed to be in touch. I am. Emily was indignant and felt the anger beginning to boil inside her. He's not stupid. He should know that if I don't answer at work, I should call on my cell phone. Okay, it's all just silly. I'm telling you, Lubov Markovna, you know, I went to my friends. Said he won't be back tonight. What do you mean he's not coming back? Emily's eyebrows went up. Just like that, the mother-in-law said, hiding her face in a smile. They went fishing. You don't have to wait until Sunday. But why didn't he even warn me? Emily didn't understand what was going on. Why would he warn you? He's a grown man. It's the weekend. Or are you against your husband having his own time? You know, girl, this kind of control isn't going to do any good. To what kind of control? Emily raised her voice. Do I tell him not to do anything? Just call and say he's going away. Especially for almost 3 days. Emily immediately dialed her husband's number, but his phone was off. Don't even try to reach him, Cynthia gritted through her teeth. There's no reception. He's on the road at 03000 hours. He said he'll call when he's online. That's ridiculous. Emily shook her head. Okay, if you say so, then that's the way it is. I don't see the point in taking this argument any further. I'm tired, Cynthia. Can't I just go and rest? I haven't cooked dinner? Her mother-in-law grinned maliciously. Still no. You can cook something for yourself. And now we've completely relaxed. Do you even remember the last time you stood at the stove? I don't understand, Cynthia snapped suddenly. Emily, as I recall, you fiercely defended my right to stand at the stove. It was all girls you can't, he doesn't like it. Mommy knows best. Thank you so much for taking over the cooking, but I didn't ask you to. If you don't want to cook for yourself without problems, I will. Besides, no one canceled delivery. Don't get excited. I won't starve to death. How you talk. Indignant mother-in-law. Don't forget, my dear, that you live in my apartment, and therefore, according to my rules, you haven't opened your mouth in front of Alex. I'll tell him all about the way you treat me. Do whatever you want. Emily shouted. Do you think I'm stuck in your apartment like this? I don't know how you work Alex so hard to keep him from moving out, but I promise, as soon as he gets back, I'll bring it up again. On Saturday, Cynthia left for the cottage. Even awake, Emily was glad to see her gone. Her mother-in-law, as expected, had not prepared breakfast, but the girl was not upset. She quickly kneaded the dough and fried a mountain of appetizing pancakes, which almost all ate. Emily's figure wasn't something to be watched. She was one of those rare breeds that no matter what you fed them, they would still be slim and neat. Emily was happy with her constitution, because with a busy work schedule, she could not train in the gym, and sit on a diet was impossible. So much energy was expended during the day that if she ate a meager diet, she would just faint on the way, eating the last pancake. Emily washed the dishes and dialed Alex's phone. It was still silent. Well, you've got to be kidding, the girl thought. You have to leave like that and not say a word. I bet Cynthia was whispering nonsense to him. She swore she'd tell me everything. She's a chatterbox. Well, it's easier to ignore it. I'd better think of something to do today. It's a day off after all. The weather's nice. Maybe go to the cemetery. It's been a long time since I've been there. I'd like to take Grandpa with me. Hello, Grandpa. Emily said excitedly into the receiver when Henry answered. My little birdie, greetings. I wasn't expecting you. What are you doing home so early? Grandpa, listen. I was thinking maybe we could visit my parents at the cemetery. It's been a while. Wouldn't you like to see them? Let's go, of course, Grandpa said. Aren't you with your husband today? He's gone. I'm all alone at home. So I thought, when will I ever get away again? Come on, get ready. I'll call a cab and we'll go together. I'll be right there. Emily got dressed and went outside. She went into a flower shop and bought some white lilies, then called a cab and went to her grandfather's house. Henry was already waiting for her in the driveway. He looked quite alert. Apparently, the new medication his doctor had prescribed was doing its job well. There was even a blush on his cheeks. Hi, Grandpa, kissed his granddaughter when he got into the cab. And you are fresh and alert. I'll watch this, because yesterday I saw how that nurse tortured me. They don't make women like that these days. Where'd you find her? She'd get me out of this world if I needed her. You like it? She laughed. You're just lonely. That nurse is a good nurse. Sarah Thompson recommended her to me. She used to babysit her mom? Tough. Yeah, I bet she is. But she's good at her job, and I'm sure you'll always have plenty to talk about. Oh yes, suppressed a chuckle grandfather. This lady will surprise everyone. I had no idea she was so interested in art. Not as a professional, of course, but still. We talked to her for hours. It's not boring. I'm glad Emily laid her head on her grandfather's shoulder. And I bought flowers for Mom and Dad. Look how pretty they are. Yeah, Amber loved those. We had a flower garden at our old house. Your grandmother always planted white lilies. Little Snail, always hiding in the flower bed, getting pollen all over her. And we'd run around looking for them. How many years has it been? The cab pulled up to the cemetery. Emily and her grandfather got out in front of the massive cast-iron gate and headed down the main avenue into the depths. Along the way, they looked at the figurative monuments, the birds singing very loudly. Autumn was coming, but it was still very warm. The sun was shining in summer. Breaking through the thick, not yet begun to yellow leaves, thousands of sun bunnies lay on the paving stones. At last they reached the place. A tall monument of gray granite cast a large shadow. From the polished slab smiled a man and a woman, forever imprinted on the soulless stone. Emily's fingers touched the cold, smooth slab. She gently stroked the faces and placed the flowers she'd brought in a vase, taking the dried bouquet from there. "Hello," Amber Henry murmured. "And hello, Fred. I'm sorry we don't come to see you often enough. I've gotten so bad. I think I'm going to join you for good." "Grandfather, are you at it again?" Emily frowned. "Mom, Dad, don't listen to him. I'll take care of Grandpa. You'll have to be without him for a while." Emily's parents died together. Both had a passion for mountain climbing. Henry Johnson, who lost his wife early, guarded his daughter Amber more than any treasure. But the girl was very active and ambitious. When she married Fred, her classmate, her happiness was boundless. Henry did not like his son-in-law, although he had practically no common interests with him. But it was enough for him to know that Fred loved Amber and would do anything for her. The energetic young couple had been interested in mountaineering since college. When Amber and Fred were in the same course, Henry didn't like his daughter's hobby much. After all, each ascent was associated with a huge risk. But it was useless to dissuade Amber. With Fred's appearance, Henry calmed down a little. The strong man could always back up his fragile wife, and he chose less dangerous routes. Often the couple confined themselves to the climbing wall. And when Amber got pregnant and completely abandoned their hobby, with the birth of Emily in the house came great joy. The girl was not by years of development. Early learned to walk and talk. Parents actively engaged in her education, enrolled in many circles, giving the child the opportunity to choose a class to his liking. But most of all, little Emily liked to spend time in the antique shop of her grandfather, where she often ran away. Parents did not even guess that their daughter was truant. After all, every night she was met by a smiling grandfather, covering up his granddaughter's secret hobbies. When Emily went to the 3rd grade, her parents suddenly informed her that soon they planned to go to Elbrus. The conquest of this mountain peak was their longtime shared dream. After almost 10 years of break, going to the mountains was quite dangerous. But as Fred liked to joke, a mountaineer is forever a mountaineer. No one could have imagined that this trip would be the last of their lives. The deaths of the Henry couple were reported a week after Amber and Fred left. Emily still remembered how her grandfather had turned pale and literally shrunk in front of his eyes when he heard the terrible news on the phone. Details were scarce, both had gone off a cliff. Fred's anchor failed and he, who was the first to go, fell off, pulling Amber, who had not had time to secure the hook. They didn't find the bodies right away. Emily didn't remember the funeral well. Both she and her grandfather were in a kind of oblivion, unwilling to accept the terrible truth. Numerous relatives and family friends took it upon themselves to organize the funeral, wake, and other events. Emily abandoned her studies, stopped talking. Grandfather, on the contrary, went to work, hired for his granddaughter governesses, but after closing the shop rushed home to make sure that Emily is all right. He hired a psychologist who came to the girl every day and had heartfelt conversations with her, talking himself, constantly looking for ways to bring his granddaughter out of her mental state. For a 10-year-old girl, what happened was a true nightmare, because her parents were almost everything to her. Gradually, Emily came to her senses. Riding lessons helped. At first, Henry simply brought his granddaughter to the racetrack. The psychologist claimed that an therapy is very effective for the treatment of mental traumas. Emily treated them with sugar and apples. The girl gradually began to talk and then asked to climb on the horse. Henry did not spare any money for his granddaughter. Visits to the racetrack became regular. He even bought her her own horse, for which Emily came to the stall twice a week. Over the years, the wound healed. She and her grandfather often traveled to the cemetery, where they could hold conversations with the smiling and eternally frozen faces of Amber and Fred. After graduating from high school, Emily enrolled in the Art Institute. She liked studying. She still continued to live with her grandfather, although he bought a separate apartment for his granddaughter. But the girl did not want to distance herself from the most beloved man in the world. Everything changed when she began to work in the State Gallery. Only weekends Emily could spend time with her grandfather. On weekdays, she often stayed late, trying to restore another time-damaged masterpiece. That day, Emily stayed longer than usual. A large collection of ancient mosaics had been brought in, and the entire staff was hard at work piecing together the smallest details. Emily returned home at midnight, having given her grandfather advance notice. When she entered the apartment, she immediately sensed something amiss. Henry rarely went to bed before 2 in the morning, and this time he didn't even come out to greet his granddaughter and offer a late dinner, as was his custom. Emily noticed the light on in the kitchen. She ran in without even taking her shoes off. Henry was lying on the floor with his arms out to the sides. Emily's heart clenched. On woozy legs, she walked over to her grandfather and tried to feel for a pulse. There was no heartbeat. Terrified, Emily dialed the ambulance and waited. She immediately remembered everything she'd been taught in her life safety class, direct cardiac massage, CPR. In desperate attempts, Emily pressed on her grandfather's chest and sobbed. Suddenly, he let out a long wheeze and hissed. Emily's heart sank. She began to kiss her grandfather, flooding his face with her tears. The ambulance came quickly, but by then Henry had regained consciousness. He flatly refused to be hospitalized, but Emily was adamant. They learned later that Henry Johnson was suffering from heart failure. And if Emily had returned a minute later that day, there was nothing that could have been done. But fate had it differently. Since then, a woman has been working at the house as a housekeeper and caregiver on a full-time basis. Emily quit and got a job in a private gallery, where the schedule was more gentle. It was there that she met Alex. Alex only came over on Sunday evenings. Emily sat in her room, trying not to attract her mother-in-law's attention. Emily greeted her husband angrily, finally. "What's the meaning of this?" "No matter what I start, it's all to no avail." Alex brushed it off. "I'm tired and hungry." "Alex, are you serious? You've been gone for 2 days. You didn't even give me any notice that you were leaving, and now you're just ignoring it. Why do I have to report back? I called you to warn you, but you didn't even pick up the phone, and it's my fault again. I'm not accusing you of anything, but that's not how it works. And you called my work number, even though you know my main number perfectly well. That's enough. I wanted to go out and the guys called me. I explained everything to my mom. She didn't say anything to you." "She did. She did. That's a separate conversation. After all, I am your wife. Interfering with my mom is not the best solution, especially since you know how she feels about me." Alex got angry. "You two are both pecking at me. You can't seem to split something." "What did she do to you?" "Nothing, but I got to her. I don't know what the argument was about. You're always on her side, even when you see she's wrong. You respect her age. How silly is that? She's not old, there's nothing wrong with her head. Though I'm beginning to doubt it." Alex pressed his lips together. "I don't know what happened between you two. I can only guess about another scandal. I'll talk to her, but please be patient." "I'm already patient to the last of my strength. She started badgering me about my food. Please, let's go away. We have somewhere to live. I can't be on the same property with her anymore. Honey, you know that apartment is very far from my work. It's inconvenient to drive every day. I don't want to get up half an hour early. And you probably won't like cooking and cleaning. Your mother runs the whole house." That's all excuses. A million women can handle the work and the household. And I can do it. Please, Alex, at least think about it. I just can't do it anymore. I'd rather sacrifice time than slowly destroy my psyche and my marriage. Alex kissed Emily's forehead. "Okay, I'll think about it and talk to my mom. By the way, where's the fish?" "What fish? We were just relaxing in nature. Why bring home ruffles?" Emily wondered. "We could have dried them. I like mixed river fish, but Mom would blow our minds over fish hanging on the balcony." Alex laughed. "No way. Okay, let's go out to dinner. I'm awfully hungry." "You go by yourself. I don't want to see Cynthia Lewis right now. Besides, I've already eaten. Come back soon, I miss you." 2 months passed. Alex still hadn't thought about moving, citing his busy work schedule. He stayed late every day. Emily almost didn't notice it because she was working, preparing for the exhibition, even spending her weekends in the gallery. She was glad, because she didn't have to cross paths with her mother-in-law. But with her husband, too, she almost never saw him. In the evenings, Alex was in a bad mood, went to bed and turned away. In the morning, he was already rushing to work. The presentation at the gallery was very successful. Many exhibits were sold. Even Grandpa was pleased with his presence. But after the event, Sarah Thompson called Emily aside. "Emily," she began softly. "I know you've been working hard and must be pretty tired." The girl smiled a little shyly. "I have a little business proposition for you. Basically, I'd like you to take a vacation next month, because you're not wearing your face." But Emily, sensing some kind of a catch. "I have to go somewhere," Sarah Thompson exhaled. "They know and they don't travel much. But I've got a lot on my plate here right now. I can't trust anyone else." "Where to?" "New York. Emily, for a week, 2 weeks tops. An old acquaintance of mine has something of interest there. He's willing to give us a huge collection of copperware and silverware to sell. You can't miss out on something like that. We need to drive around, see what he is interesting. Pick up options for our gallery. He's got paintings, too. I've been wanting one for a long time. The man's not old. He's been sitting on his treasures like a stingy knight. Now he's selling them off. And you entrust me with such a responsible assignment?" Emily was surprised. "Who else? You've been working for me for so long, I couldn't find a better specialist. Besides, you alone can correctly assess the collection, estimate the restoration work. I'll pay you everything, don't worry, and I won't hurt you with the bonus. I'd go myself, but you know what I mean." "Okay," Emily said after thinking about it. "I'll go. It's a little tense at home right now, and I didn't want to leave my grandfather alone. I promise you, I'll stop by Henry Johnson's house a couple times. It's been a long time since we've had a heart-to-heart. Don't worry about it. You'll have a good time. It's New York. Thomas Wilson, our client, has a very interesting house, right on Fifth Avenue, an old mansion. I assure you, this trip will do you good, and you'll learn a lot about yourself as a professional." "Okay, you got it," Emily smiled. "I hope Alex won't mind too much." Alex didn't mind. He was even glad that Emily was going on a business trip. What's so weird about it? Alex was surprised. "I'm very happy for you. I'd love to go to New York for a week or two, especially at someone else's expense. I'm so tired on vacation. It's time." Speaking of vacations, Emily was embarrassed. "Sarah Thompson promised me a vacation next month. Maybe you should take one too, go on a vacation somewhere, especially since I'll be well paid for my business trip. Can we go to the seaside? And the commission after the exhibition is decent." "That would be nice," Alex winked. "We'll think about it. You go for now and don't worry about anything. And Mom will calm down. She is often provoking conflicts again these days. By the way, you still haven't decided anything about moving." "Honey, let's do it after New Year's. You won't be back until mid-December. Who moves before the holidays? What's the big deal? New Year's Eve, new house. It's all very symbolic. I'm not going to giggle and beat my hands. This is how I leave my mom alone on a holiday. Let's do this, you come back, then we'll celebrate, then we'll go on vacation, and then we'll move in. Promise." The girl exclaimed, surprised at her husband's flexibility. "I promise." Alex nodded and pressed his wife against him. The trip to New York was very successful. Thomas Wilson turned out to be a pleasant elderly man confined to a wheelchair. He enthusiastically told Emily about his huge collection, showed all his treasures, accompanying it all with fascinating stories. Free time, and there was a lot of it, the girls spent for walks. The Big Apple was in full swing preparing for the celebration of the new year. Rich illumination on the streets created the illusion of a fairy tale. Emily had traveled to New York City twice before. As a child with her parents and when she studied at the Institute. Now she just admired the city, went to warm herself in coffee shops, took a lot of pictures and reported everything to her grandfather. They often communicated by video. Henry Johnson loved this city. As a young man, he often traveled to New York for work and stayed there for long periods of time. It was here that he met his future wife, but never returned after her death. Grandpa. Emily enthusiastically broadcast as she showed Henry Johnson the Kazan Cathedral glowing brightly in the evening landscape. "We should definitely come here together." "Where would I go, little girl?" laughed grandfather. "I'm not old enough to travel. I've seen enough of your happy face." "No, grandfather," Emily resisted. "It's not the same. It's more solemn in person. It smells like a holiday. Let's come in the summer, promise me. I know you love Peter. I do, Emily, but I'm afraid I won't live to see the summer, frowned grandfather. Emily, your death books again. I'm not talking to you. I'm done. All right, agreed, let's go. But you were going on vacation to the sea this winter. I'll have a lot of things to do in the summer. I'll make a deal, Sarah Thompson. She comes here a lot. We could ask her to take her place. We could do something fun, huh? It's so beautiful here. I might even stay here. Why? Is that a good idea? Henry Johnson was coaxing me. Grab your Alex and go. There's always a job for someone as skilled as you. That's how Sarah Thompson's gonna let me go. And I don't like changing jobs. No, that's just a dream. But I'm sure I'll be coming here more often. All right, granddaughter, laughed Henry Johnson. We'll see. Oh, that's it. My lady's here. You take your walk, I'm gonna go get my shots. Love you, Grandpa. Take care. Love you too, baby. Emily was walking down Rubenstein toward Nevsky. There was almost no snow on the sidewalks in the center. The tall girl on high heels deftly rounded the passers-by she met. Suddenly she felt her foot twist. There was a cracking sound. They're at it again. Emily thought with horror as she looked down at her feet. The heel was dangling treacherously on a thin piece of sole. This is a must. So I've had no luck with heels lately. I've degenerated to sneakers. I went for a walk, you see. Emily stood and laughed. It was impossible to walk so resolutely. She was about to call a cab, but her phone was dead. The battery dead. Oh, shit. Emily cursed. Really came a voice from very close by. I don't believe it. A man was standing next to her, laughing. At first, Emily didn't recognize him and wanted to reproach the stranger for his rude behavior. But after a closer look, she realized that the guy who had helped her free her heel from the bars a few months ago was standing in front of her. Only this time he was dressed not in a work overalls, but in a very decent coat. Is that you? The girl exclaimed in surprise. It looks like me, the guy smiled back. I see you have such a hobby breaking heels. Don't make me laugh. Emily laughed. I feel awkward enough as it is. I don't know how to get home with a broken heel. I wanted to call a cab, but my phone died. Let me give you a ride. How far is it? Oh no, it's inconvenient. I'd appreciate it if you'd call me a cab. That'll be enough. What's the point? I have a car over there, the man waved somewhere to the side. I actually noticed you from it. Just as I was about to drive off, bang. I see this picture. I didn't even believe it was you. But it would have been hard not to recognize you. The look is too memorable. And that hair. It's quite ordinary, Emily blushed, even the hair is sparse. It's not often you see a young lady with such a mop of red hair without a hat. Aren't you afraid of getting cold? The weather here is deceptive. The wind is blowing. I'm hardened. Emily smiled. All right, I'll take it, I guess. But it's not far to Kanaya. I'm staying there. That's great. I'm going that way too. My name's Justin, by the way. And you're Emily? That's a cool name. My sister's Daria too. I'm here to see her, by the way. So you're not from around here? No, I think we're from around here. I'm on a little vacation. Once a year I come here to visit my sister. I let myself take a break from work. Why are we standing here? Let's get in the car. Emily took her new acquaintance under her arm and showed her, hopping on one foot. She thought to herself that it probably looked extremely comical from the outside. But it wasn't far to walk. After a couple of steps, Justin stopped and carefully opened the door of his car in front of Emily. The girl even whistled. The car was very expensive and shone beautifully with new paint and the lights of the garlands. Surprised, Justin laughed. Well, yes, such a car, mumbled Emily. When we first met you, you were wearing such a dirty overalls. I never would have thought that the person wearing it would be driving a car like that. It was Justin who was a little confused. At the time, I was on my way to get cigarettes from an apartment that was being remodeled, arrived in just a t-shirt. It was getting chilly. Well, I borrowed overalls from one of the workers. I'm surprised you remember me at all. I have the most ordinary appearance. Appearance, maybe an ordinary, but the smile. You can tell you're a good man, and did not pass by a girl in trouble. Raised that way. I agree that few people will stop now. They go here bending in their smartphones and prefer not to notice the world around them. Can you imagine how many people could be helped if they saw their grief in time? I've always been like that. I've always been like that. My sister's the same way. We're all human beings. We have to help each other, or there'll be nothing human left. Besides, I believe in karma. Today you help, tomorrow you'll be helped. Emily nodded logically. It's rare to meet someone like that these days. And we're here already. Well, it was nice to meet you, Justin. And I'm Emily, the young man smiled. And tell me, how long are you here for? I'm already leaving tomorrow morning. Why, have you been thinking for a while? Maybe I should take you out for coffee? You'll forgive me if I seem intrusive. I just don't believe in coincidence. We've met twice and under the same circumstances. I mean, think about the odds of that happening. So I'd like to keep in touch. Okay, it's not fate, so yes. Don't feel bad, Emily smiled. We can see each other in our town. I work in a gallery. Do you know the model? He's an art man. You could put it that way. You're welcome to come. I'm there most days, except weekends. You can drop by at lunchtime. Let me leave my phone number. Are you interested in art too? You could say that Justin nodded. Only a different kind of art. I work in the IT field as an IT programmer. Surprised by the girl. Not exactly. Although that's what they call us in the commonplace. I prefer to be called an information systems engineer. Oh, I'm far from that. We're just now training our brainchild in culture. Are you an art historian? Not exactly, but great, Justine interrupted. I hope you won't refuse me a consultation too. If it would be within my power to do so, please do. Okay, it was nice to meet you. I'll be sure to call you when I get back. See you then, Emily smiled. At the airport, she even called Alex to arrange a meeting. Much to her surprise, her husband refused to come to pick her up. Amy, I'll be at work, he informed her. Take a cab. But we had an agreement. The wife was indignant. You're flying in at 12 noon? It's not like I can dash out of the office just to pick you up. What's the problem? Should I call a cab? Nothing, the girl said, frustrated. Just thought you might have missed me. I missed you, but I'm working. I'll see you tonight. Okay, Emily sighed. She made her own way home, where to her great relief she didn't catch her mother-in-law. Thank goodness she's not here, the girl thought. That's the last thing I want to do right now is listen to her lecturing. What is this? Emily noticed that there was a lipstick on her night table. It seemed like nothing out of the ordinary. But the tube was foreign. She removed the cap and looked at the bright red contents in bewilderment. Is this what Cynthia Lewis puts on her makeup like this? She pronounced. Haven't noticed her like that. 6 decades old and colors like that. It's odd. And why is it in our bedroom anyway? Emily quickly put the find out of her mind and started calling Sarah Thompson. Emily returned from her business trip, reported back, sent all her work files and arranged to come back the next day. She slept through the evening. Emily woke up when she heard Alex return. She immediately jumped out of bed and ran out to meet her husband. Alex stood in the doorway, disgruntled. Is something wrong? Emily asked worriedly. You're back. It's kind of strange, Alex answered. Where's Mom? I don't know. I arrived, she was gone. Call her. Get her location. I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. It's probably for the best. What are you talking about? Emily's frowning. Look, we need to talk. And Mom would just be in the way right now. You're scaring me. Is it serious? Yes, Emily, it's serious. Oh my God, the girl's pale. What does Grandpa have to do with it? Alex answered irritably, you have a problem with him. Of course. He's the closest thing I have to a family member. And you're standing there like that. I'm thinking about the worst. I haven't even called him yet. Alex silently went to the kitchen and poured himself some water, drinking the whole glass. The man turned around and looked at his wife seriously. Next, he began. We have to break up. Emily's breath caught from surprise, and her legs felt weak. What do you mean, break up? in the most direct sense. I've fallen in love with someone else. Are you kidding me right now? It's not funny. Alex, I'm serious. Emily, I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I've regretted it. And I wasn't sure how I felt before. Before? What do you mean before? How long have you been with her? 6 months. 6 months? Emily shrieked. But how is that possible? Alex, I don't believe you. It's not true. You're just kidding. I'm not joking, her husband snapped. Come on, you idiot. I'm telling you straight out that I don't love you anymore. I have another woman with whom I am happy, and she's expecting a child with me. Oh my God. Emily slid down the wall to the floor. Tears came to her eyes. You're just telling me this now? When else? I didn't think it was serious at first, but then I realized you and I were way out of our league. And she is this about the baby? Emily asked sadly, isn't it? So tell me. It's not just the baby that I found out about recently. I've been in love with her for a long time. You could say that the pregnancy was the final factor in my decision. I don't believe it, Emily sobbed openly. Tears were pouring down her face and salty streams into her mouth. Emily, everyone, calm down. I did everything I could. I swear, I didn't mean it that way. It just happened. It just happened, the girl laughed hysterically. It just happened? You cheated on me. You hid the affair. And now you're expecting a baby. Is that what you call it? You betrayed me, Alex, and I loved you. Tell me. Does Cynthia Lewis know about this? Is she the one who's been covering for you? Is that what you were doing when you were supposedly working late and going on vacation with your friends? So answer me. Don't get hysterical, Alex ordered. Yes, that's it. What else do you want me to say? So everything is clear. Mom only found out recently. Don't blame her. How do you like to do that? I told her when I found out Nikki was pregnant. Nikki. That's whose red lipstick is on my night table. What, did you sneak her into our bedroom already? Only once, and not in the bedroom. I put it there myself. She dropped it by accident. I thought it was yours. I just brought her over to meet my mom. You're crazy. Bringing your mistress here to our house, taking advantage of my absence. Emily, don't overreact, Alex snapped at her. This isn't our house. It's Mom's apartment. I get it, Emily laughed, getting up from the floor. Mom's apartment. So that's why you've been dragging your feet about moving in. You had it all planned out and were just waiting for the right time. And that witch. She knew everything from the start. Don't try to change my mind. I imagine her eyes lit up when she heard that Nikki was pregnant. Your mother's obsessed with grandchildren. She hated me when she found out I couldn't have kids. I know all that, and I only kept my mouth shut out of respect for you. You shouldn't have. It should have been over a long time ago. What do you want from me? I'm a young, healthy man. I want to be a father. Can't you give me that? It's not too late to break up as friends. You have your whole life ahead of you. You're beautiful, interesting, smart. Have your own life, but without me. I swear there are plenty of men out there who don't want kids for nothing. You're an idiot, Emily said. A star. Friends, you say? After such a betrayal, I don't want to know you. And you're telling me about friendship? It's over. I'll pack my things and leave tomorrow. Don't even try to come after me and apologize. Emily ran out of the kitchen and locked herself in her bedroom. She sobbed into her pillow at night. It's over, she thought. How could he do this to me? Is it my fault I can't have children? He swore that none of this mattered to him. And you were all over him, Mommy. I bet she's probably glowing with joy, realizing she got rid of me. I can live with Nikki and them. I can live on my own. The next day, Emily excused herself from work after lunch, telling Sarah Thompson that she needed to take care of some household chores. There was no time to delay. No reconciliation with Alex was out of the question, especially after his confession that his mistress was pregnant. Emily would surely forgive the treason itself. All the more her husband had confessed to it. But it was a real betrayal. Since childhood, her grandfather taught her that you can forgive anyone, except the traitor and hypocrites. Having cheated once, each of them could easily commit a second offense. Emily even felt lighter when she thought it over in the morning. Living under the same roof with a traitorous husband and a tyrant mother-in-law was unbearable. And here she was getting rid of two problems at once. When Emily tried to open the apartment with her own key, she found it didn't fit. The locks had even been changed, she thought gloatingly. It's okay if they don't open it. I'll call the police. After all, I have every right to take my things. She pressed the bell with all her might. The door was not open for a long time. At last there were sounds, clicks. Cynthia Lewis appeared on the threshold and grinned.
We thought you'd gone all the way out. Let me go. I've got things to pack. Emily gritted her teeth.
The mother-in-law obediently moved away, letting the girl inside. To Emily's surprise, she spotted a pair of high-heeled boots in the hallway. We have company, her mother-in-law grinned. Not us, girl Cynthia pursed her lips. You don't live here anymore, remember. It's not much use. Emily walked into the room. A girl a little younger than her was sitting on the couch. Alex stood with his back turned to the window. Hello, Emily said, raising her tone defiantly. You must be Nikki? Amy, Alex interrupted. Don't do that. Get your stuff and go. I'm smiling, Emily said. I won't interrupt you, mind your own business. Emily walked out and headed for the bedroom. She took a large bag out of the closet and began to put things in it. Cynthia Lewis, accompanied by Nikki, suddenly appeared on the doorstep. Both were watching the girl's actions intently. Can I help you? Emily asked wryly. Or are you just standing there, amusing yourself with the spectacle? You, Nikki, stay here and make sure this girl doesn't take anything extra, her mother-in-law smirked. I'll go and get her things from the bathroom. Okay, Aunt Cynthia, Alex's mistress said. I just don't know what she's allowed to take and what she's not. Cynthia chuckled to herself. It seemed that these two had known each other for a long time and were already working together. Fuck them. Emily said dryly out loud. I'll only take what's mine. I don't want anything that doesn't belong to me. If you're worried about the jewelry Alex gave me, it's in the jewelry box on the table. Eat all 2 nicknames. And this one too. Emily pulled the wedding ring off her finger and tossed it toward the woman. It clinked and rolled to the side. She threw clothes and makeup into her bag and reached for a beautiful chest. Hey, Nikki rudely called out to her. What's that? None of your business. It's my parents' stuff, Emily snapped at her. Don't you ever try to get your hands on it. You'll be ripped out without even blinking. Nikki, horrified by the threat, stumbled back to Cynthia Lewis, who was carrying a bag full of something. She's threatening me, Aunt Cynthia, cried the girl. How dare you? The mother-in-law lashed out at Emily. Emily shoved her aside, snatched the package from her hands, and headed for the exit. On her way out, she glanced into the living room, where Alex was still staring out the window. Goodbye, Emily told him dryly and left the apartment for good. Her husband didn't even look back at her. Emily stood in the driveway, waiting for a cab. She looked at her bags with disdain, realizing that the last 4.5 years of her life had fit so easily into them. She hadn't said anything to her grandfather yet. She didn't want to worry him prematurely. The car pulled up and the driver helped load the bags into the trunk. Emily was already at Grandpa's house in 15 minutes, ringing the doorbell. She stood there in utter confusion. She didn't want to burden Henry with her problems. The old man might have a heart attack. The nurse opened the door. Oh, hello, Emily mumbled. Where's Grandpa? Hello, Emily, the woman nodded. Henry Johnson was sick this morning, but he's fine now. He called me, and I called an ambulance right away. Emily turned pale, and the woman hurried to reassure her. Don't worry, it was just a sudden drop in blood pressure. It's all fixed now. He's resting at his place. Thank God, Emily exhaled and went into the apartment. The nurse looked at her bags in surprise, but didn't ask any questions. Emily dropped her burden and immediately rushed into her grandfather's bedroom. Henry Johnson was half lying there, reading a book. He grumbled indignantly when he heard the door open. Marina, I told you not to disturb me. Grandfather, it's me, Emily sobbed. Oh, Henry was surprised. Emily, how are you here? I told Marina not to call you, not to distract you from your work. She didn't call, Emily reassured him. You can't be stressed out right now. I'm here myself, but it's still 4:30. Did you get off work early? I missed my grandfather and Peter. How was your trip? It was fine, Grandpa, Emily smiled. But you can't fool me. I can see your eyes are crying. Come on, tell me. I could never fool you. Where? I'm coming to see you for good. The girl confessed.
What do you mean? Henry was surprised and raised himself on the pillows.
Stay down and don't get up. Emily stopped him. We broke up with Alex. If you don't mind, I'll stay with you for a while. Wait, no, of course I don't mind. How could you even think that? It's your house too. But what do you mean we broke up? Are you fighting about that witch again? No, grandfather. Emily took a deep breath and told Henry everything. The old man listened silently, stroking her hair. I want to get back at him so badly. I'm so angry, Emily summarized. Revenge is a useless thing, said her grandfather. His deed will definitely boomerang back on him. You'll see. The best thing you can do is to forget all this. My girl, you're strong. You'll get through this. And I won't leave you. And let these people live their lives as they please. You're too good for this family. It's a despicable thing to do to a man like you. That doesn't speak well for them. Thank God it's all coming out now. Alex may be a scoundrel, but it was good of him to come clean. Now you have to file for divorce. Emily raised one eyebrow. Why wait? I get your point. You're not going back, even if he crawls back on his knees. And there's no point in him getting ready to be a father now, and his mom won't let him. Forget it, girl. You're young, beautiful, and wonderful. You'll meet your love again. Grandpa, what if I don't? I can't have children. Alex said it wasn't important to him at first. But look, he changed his mind. As soon as there were more interesting prospects on the horizon. Emily took a serious look at Henry Johnson. Listen to me. Believe me, children are the greatest happiness. But if God didn't give them to you, then you're destined for a more important mission. And if that's the case, there will be someone to share your joys and sorrows. The most important thing is not to despair. Did you bring your things? The girl nodded. Yes, I left it in the hallway. It's funny that there are only 2 bags. Can you imagine? Those guys were still standing there to make sure I didn't steal anything. Imagine I would have left everything but my mom's jewelry box. But I don't have time to go shopping right now. It's New Year's Eve. By the way, yes? Grandpa shook his finger. Let's go shopping for a Christmas tree one of these days. We'll put a big one up to the ceiling in the living room. Like we used to, remember? Of course I remember, Grandpa. How could anyone forget our Christmas trees? Emily smiled. Did you still have the old toys? You couldn't throw them away, could you? Are you crazy? Throw them away, you say. It's all plastic and stamped toys on Christmas trees nowadays. We have real antiques. Even the hair my parents used to put on the tree when I was a kid. No, honey. Everything's safe and sound. When's your day off? I have to work tomorrow and the day after that, and then we're all off for the holidays. And after January 5th, I'm going on vacation. So we'll spend a lot of time together. Alex and I were going away. But you see how things turned out. One thing's for sure, I'm not going anywhere. So at least I'll spend the holidays with you. I'll recover, have a good rest, without the constant nervousness. And after the vacation, I think I'll file divorce papers so I don't have to wait. Well, go unpack. Your room's always waiting for you. I haven't even touched anything in there. I just call the cleaning service every once in a while to clean it up. You get a good night's rest and everything will be fine. I love you so much, Grandpa. Emily gave the old man a big hug.
I love you too, granddaughter.
On her last day at work, Emily quickly finished all her work. She was already looking forward to the weekend and vacation. Sarah Thompson was very pleased with the results of her work. So without a shadow of a doubt, she let her ward go on a long vacation. Emily, the gallery owner, came into the office. Have you finished all the catalogs? Of course, Sarah. Emily responded, looking out from behind her computer. All that's left to do is check the catalogs for the vaults, and everything's perfect. I'll leave you to it. I'm going to run some errands. You then give the girls everything and you can rest easy. To congratulate Grandpa on the upcoming holidays, of course. Sarah smiled. Emily spent another hour with the paperwork. Having finished her work, she got ready to drink coffee. Suddenly there was a knock at the office. Come in, Emily shouted. Emily shyly looked at one of the gallery workers. "There is someone to see you." A man. He said he was Justin. Justin? The girl thought. "Oh yes, Justin, that's right. Tell him I'll be right there." Wow, that's unexpected. Why didn't he even call? Emily thought. "Okay, I'll find out. I'm so glad I got this done. At least we can have a normal conversation. I'll just have coffee with him and invite him to my favorite coffee shop." Emily threw on her fur coat and dashed out of the office. As she walked down the stairs, she caught herself thinking that she was very pleased with Justin's visit. She liked the guy for his directness and sincerity. He was standing near the large mirror downstairs, scrutinizing one of the gallery brochures. Justin. Emily waved her hand at him. Justin looked away and smiled broadly. "What about you? No call." "I must have gotten the number wrong," he shrugged. "I called, and there was some angry man. Good thing you told me where you work. And I caught you. Honestly, it was just luck. Even though I work around here, even if I'd left with nothing, it wouldn't have been such a shame." "Yeah, you're just in time," Emily said, smiling. "I was just finishing up my business, and I was about to have coffee, and you were going to keep me company." "I'd love to," Justin nodded. "Then I have one request." Emily squinted at him. "Anything you want." "Let's not talk about work today. I have a vacation ahead of me, and frankly, I'm so very tired." "That's no problem at all. And I have to work until the holidays. Then I have a week's vacation, and then I'm back in action. I just got back from vacation yesterday, and I'm right back at your place." Emily and Justin sat down in a cozy cafe and ordered drinks and desserts. "It's frosty today," the guy came up to her arm. "It's a stark contrast to Miami. It's a mild European winter there. Not like us." "It's all right. On the contrary, I like it. I love winter," the girl replied. "Emily, I've noticed something different about you. You look different, kind of sad. Are you all right? You don't have to answer that. It's an inappropriate question, considering we're almost strangers. But what if there's something I can help you with?" "No, I'm fine," Emily smiled, but something in her smile betrayed a lie. Justin noticed it. "Well, if you don't want to, don't tell me," he nodded. "You know," the girl decided, "I'll tell you. It is believed that it is sometimes useful to speak out, especially to a stranger, so that there was no prejudice to the situation. In general, a couple of days ago I packed my things and left my husband. Or rather, he kicked me out. Almost 5 years of marriage. He said he had another woman he loved and she was expecting a child with him. Well, I did not argue, quite calmly reacted and just left. Now I live with my grandfather. And you know, I even feel better in some ways. That's the way it is." "Wow." Justin shook his head and looked at Emily. "And you say it all so calmly. Women are usually hysterical in these situations." "It wasn't all smooth sailing. I was living in an illusion. I just turned a blind eye to a lot of things. And when I left, I saw everything from the outside, and I suffered from my mother-in-law. My grandfather says everything's for the best, but I can hardly believe it. I don't know. I think I should rest now, spend more time with my grandfather. He's in a bad way. Heart failure. His blood pressure dropped a lot recently. He's a very good man. My grandfather's the only one I have. I lost my parents 10 years ago." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know," Justin said. "That's okay. It was a long time ago. My grandfather basically raised me. He's an antiques dealer, and he instilled in me a taste for art. He lives all alone, with only a nurse to take care of him." "Yes," Emily said. "But it's good that he has you. There are so many lonely old people nowadays with no one to help them." "No, I will never leave my grandfather," said Emily confidently. "Tomorrow we'll go Christmas tree shopping with him. It's probably not very convenient to take a cab, but..." "Let me give you a ride," Justin suggested. "It's my day off tomorrow, too, and I don't have much to do. It would be my pleasure. Besides, it's always nice to meet an interesting person. And your grandfather seems to be one of them, doesn't he?" "Oh yeah, Grandpa's a real piece of work. He always has 1,000 stories to tell. Am I boring you?" "Not at all," said the man. "I'm easy to get along with people. I like to talk." Apparently the interlocutors feel it and willingly reach out to me. "That's right." Emily laughed. "I don't know you at all, and it feels like I've known you for 100 years. I couldn't even talk so freely with my husband. But I still don't feel comfortable asking you to come with us to get the tree. Where's it going? In the cabin. On the roof, only if you mess up the car. We usually get a huge tree. Don't you worry about that at all? I'm just trying to reassure Emily's boyfriend. I have a pickup truck. I can fit a Christmas tree in the back of it. Okay, Emily sighed. That's a deal. But I have a question. Go ahead. Are you sure this won't hurt your plans? You probably have a family, Justin. I'd rather spend time with them than with a woman I don't know and her grandfather. I don't have any family. I mean, I have my parents and my sister, but they live in other cities. My parents went south about 5 years ago, my sister to New York. I'm all alone out here. No girlfriend? Emily asked disappointedly, trying not to betray her feelings. Justin almost smiled. The cat is worse than any girl. She's very jealous and demanding. But I love her like that. I can't help it. Oh, a cat. Emily laughed, and I was already thinking. And what? Did you have to get married? Upset? You bet I was. Emily blushed. Why would you be? I don't know, he winked at her. You'll forgive me for being frank, but I think you really like me. I'm good at sensing these things. Emily turned red and looked down at him. No, Emily, no, you don't have to be embarrassed about it. I like you very much, too. From the very first time I met you, I was so sorry I didn't ask for your number, even though you wouldn't have given it to me. Married after all? I'm still married, Emily replied quietly. Considering how mean your husband was to you, you can't call it a marriage. Tell me you're not going to file for divorce. I will, Emily exhaled. Grandpa's in a hurry, too. But I want to recover first. I'll do it after vacation. I can set you up with a very good lawyer. No, I don't think you'll need one. We have no property in common, no children. Why no children? Justin frowned. No, I'm sorry to be tactless, but in this situation it's a good thing we don't have any. It's just that there's a baby fever now. People have a baby almost immediately after marriage. You seem like a well-off girl. I'm sure your husband doesn't need either. Now that we're being honest with you, I'll tell it like it is. I can't have children. We wanted to have kids, but it didn't work out. Alex accepted it, but as soon as his mistress got pregnant, he ran away from me. My grandfather says that if fate has ordered it so, we should look for happiness in another direction. He's absolutely right. The main thing now is to find yourself. Once this happens, everything is within my reach, and a child can always be adopted. You can love it no less than your own. What if he's hereditary? You don't give up children for a good life. That's true. But I believe that upbringing and love are crucial. And heredity is something that can be changed. I wonder if I should go. I was very happy to talk to you, but my grandfather was waiting for me. I'll come tomorrow. Just tell me where and when. Can I give you a ride, by the way? I wouldn't mind, Emily answered playfully. Let's make it closer to 3 then. But we have to be there by 6. Grandpa's got homework at school. She didn't even notice how the holidays flew by. She'd grown close to Justin during that time. They went out a lot, talked a lot. At Christmas, her grandfather even invited the guy to visit. He liked Justin very much. Emily, her grandfather, asked her cheerfully as she did her makeup to get ready for the visit. Guest, because this guy is really good. He likes you, I can tell. And your eyes light up at the sight of him. Don't make it up, pouted her granddaughter. We're just friends. It's rare to meet such an interesting and kind person. Tell me they're still friends. Maybe it's true, but I'm not fooled. There's a spark between you two. Why don't you go ahead and get a divorce? I have a feeling Justin's going to propose to you soon. Where are you? We've only known each other a couple weeks. Justin took a good look at Emily. What kind of proposal? And he's a confirmed bachelor. A man is convinced that he doesn't need anyone until he meets a woman he's crazy about. And Justin, by all accounts, has met her. I proposed to my grandmother a month after I met her, he said. I didn't see any reason to wait. We liked each other. We had fun together. The love was such that I couldn't look at anyone else after she died. Grandfather, Emily said, indignantly, things were different in your day. Now we have to live together, get used to each other, understand each other. Without making stuff up. Lana, were you and Alex nagging? We were. What's the point? Everything's the same all the time. It's just the scenery changes. If people really love each other, they don't need to test their feelings. You'll feel it in your heart. You can't go wrong. You think so? Emily frowned. This is where it's supposed to shrink. Henry Johnson tapped his chest. I can feel it. Emily didn't have time to finish her sentence. Henry turned pale and started to fall. Grandpa. Emily cried out, frightened. What's wrong? Where are the pills? Henry slowly slid to the floor. Emily barely had time to pick him up. She dialed the ambulance and then called Justin. Justin, get over here as soon as you can. Grandpa's sick. He's all white. Did you call an ambulance? Just wait, don't worry, I'm right here. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Emily frantically rubbed her grandfather's palms together. She found the pills in his breast pocket and put a couple under his tongue, as he usually did. It's all right, granddaughter, she murmured faintly. You're going to be all right. Henry fell silent and closed his eyes. The girl sobbed, clutching his hands. When the ambulance arrived, there was nothing that could be done. The paramedic registered the time of death. At the same moment, Justin walked into the apartment, realizing that something terrible had happened. He saw Emily sobbing, trying to push the doctors away from her grandfather, and took her into another room. Emily, he patted her cheeks. Just calm down. Now sit here. I'll do everything. At the funeral, Emily could hardly stand on her feet. Some people came up to her one by one to express their condolences, but she answered machine-like, not recognizing anyone around her. Only Justin's warm palm, clutching her own, somehow connected Emily to reality. Henry was buried in the same grave where his daughter and son-in-law had lain for 20 years. For a long time, Emily had been out of sorts, but Justin wasn't about to give her into the clutches of apathy so easily. Remembering her stories, the man almost immediately began taking her to the racetrack. The fresh, frosty air soaked with horse manure, the morning, the smells, and the horses quickly brought the girl to her senses. She even began to smile. The vacation was coming to an end, but Sarah Thompson, seeing how worried her assistant was in no hurry. She told Emily to come back when she felt better. Justin never left the girl's side. He was always telling her stories, cooking her meals. He practically moved into the apartment with her. Emily didn't mind. The guy even brought his cat. Usually reserved with strangers, British cat named Margot immediately fell in love with Emily. She slept at her feet, constantly asking for hands, which caused surprise of the owner. Wow, Justin laughed. This madam usually recognizes no one but me. Emily, what's your secret? I don't know, she shrugged, looking at the fluffy, black satin fur. I've never even had a cat. Only a parrot, apparently, feels my grief. By the way, cats are sensitive, Justin nodded. And I see your companionship is doing you good. You make a couple of sandwiches for yourself when you go to feed her. I noticed. Look, your cheeks are even bigger. So Margot, keep up the good work. We've got to get back on the road to life. The cat, as if understanding, began to purr louder than eagles and hypnotized Emily with her huge green eyes. Gradually, things got better. Emily went to work. The hectic activity was a good distraction from Justin's negative thoughts. She felt completely safe. This man was tapping into her soul, something that had previously been dormant, and soon Emily realized that she loved him for real. He finally came to live with her, as Emily refused to move in with him. Every little thing in the apartment was precious to her, and she couldn't let her grandfather's memory get dusty or worse, trampled on by the tenants or the new owners. It was 6 months later when Emily filed for divorce. She'd forgotten all about Alex, who hadn't even tried to remind her, but had to address the issue as Justin just walked up to her one morning. When the girl was making coffee, got down on one knee and handed her the ring. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. Of course she agreed, because now she couldn't imagine a day of her life without Justin. But the formalities had to be settled. At the same time, the girl entered the rights of inheritance. When the notary announced the will, the hairs on Emily's head stood up. She had no idea that her grandfather owned such a huge fortune. The will left her both apartments, the entire collection of valuables, and an astronomical amount of money from the bank account. It turned out that Henry had been saving money all his life, spending almost nothing on himself. In total shock, Emily walked out of the notary's office. Her fiancé was waiting for her in the car. "Well?" He smiled at the bride. "I don't even know how to say it. Of course, I knew that my grandfather was quite a rich man, but to be so. Look at this." She handed the guy a folder, "and I am now, it turns out, an enviable bride." "Wow," the boy whistled, examining the papers. "And what do you plan to do with such a fortune?" "I don't know," Emily shook her head. "I don't need anything but an apartment, my grandfather's collection. I don't need that much. I could have enough for my grandchildren. I can't even have children." "Don't rush things. Remember that you can always adopt a baby? I can't raise someone else's child," Justin Emily sighed. "I've thought about it, but then we could do something charitable. I think Henry Johnson would be very proud of you and would be glad that his capital would go to a good cause." "Well, yes," Emily thought. "Only I don't know anything about it." "Oh, Emily, if you want to, you'll figure it out. It's not hard." "That's true, too." 3 days later, the doorbell rang in the apartment. Emily was alone. Justin had left on business. "That's strange," the girl thought. "I'm not expecting anyone. I wonder who's there." She went to the door and looked through the peephole. Almost immediately, Emily recoiled, realizing who was standing on the other side. "What do you want?" she said in a chilling voice. "Emily, please open the door. We need to talk," Alex answered. "We have nothing to talk about," Emily grinned. "The papers are filed. Divorce. I'll see you in court in a month." "Emily," shouted her husband. "This is very important. We won't take up much of your time." Emily thought she didn't want to see her husband and mother-in-law at all. She had no idea what they wanted to talk about, but she decided to open the door. "Well," she began invitingly. "What's so important?" "Aren't you going to let us in?" Cynthia Lewis asked. "No, I don't think so." "Say what you want to say and go." "Why are you so quick to chase us away?" "We're not strangers, after all," said Alex. "You're wrong, dear," laughed the girl. "We are strangers. Why did you come here?" "Emily," Alex began, eyes downcast, "and we wanted to apologize." "Yes, to apologize," repeated the mother-in-law. "For what?" Emily was surprised. "We have all our issues resolved. There's nothing to talk about. It's over and done with." "Emily, you don't understand. I want you to come back to me." What the girl opened her mouth in surprise. "What do you want me to do? You didn't get anything mixed up, did you? After what happened? What about your Nikki?" "I realize that I love only you." Emily Alex reached out to her. "Nikki was a mistake. I've rethought everything. I can't live without you. Please, I'm sorry." "What about the baby?" Emily faltered. "That witch got another witch pregnant." Love interfered. "She's been playing Alex for a fool. You know, you have to be like that. When the baby was born, I thought it was weird that he looked nothing like Alex. So I insisted on a genetic test. The paternity test was the eye-opener. Turns out Alex couldn't possibly have kids. And I kept blaming you. I'm sorry, Emily." "Oh, that's it. Oh, okay, what does this have to do with me?" Well, Alex was confused. "And I realized how stupid I've been. I don't know how to make it up to you, but I'd do anything. We also heard that Henry Johnson passed away 6 months ago. Sorry it's late, but we're sorry for your loss." The mother-in-law spoke in a sugary sweet voice. It even seemed odd to be so involved. Her grandfather had never liked her mother-in-law, and Alex didn't like him much either. They constantly asked Emily to take money from him, but the girl did not even think about it. And then it hit her. It's a very strange coincidence that you're here right now. Grandfather's death had been known for a long time. He was a well-known man in town. You must have heard about it, but you've only come now. You could have at least called 6 months ago. Sly, with a squint. But I also know something else. The notary who read my grandfather's will to me is a good friend of yours. A family friend, you might say. I didn't realize. I bet he called you right away and told you that I had become the owner of a huge fortune. Isn't that right? Don't play games. I can see right through you. Are you mistaken?" Cynthia was indignant. "I can see in your eyes that I'm not mistaken. All of you, get out of here and forget about it. I have a new life now. You can live yours however you want. And Alex, don't make up any of this stuff." The inheritance is not our property, even though I received it while I was still married. That's the law. Now goodbye." Emily slammed the door shut with a bang. Her heart was pounding desperately. But the girl felt unusually relieved, and immediately a warm wave began to rise in her stomach. Emily didn't immediately realize she was nauseous, and she barely made it to the bathroom in time. What is it? Nervous from excitement, she thought. Their health has been blown away. They'll know how to hurt others. Grandfather was right. Their betrayal has boomeranged back on them. Who'd have thought it? They had the nerve to show up. I'm shocked at these people. Thank God the divorce won't take long, just a month. And freedom. Emily began to vomit again. This time the girl was terrified. This had never happened to her before. In addition, her breasts were hurting badly. The thoughts in her head raced through at breakneck speed. Alex can't have children. Even Cynthia Lewis was guilty of treating me like that, thinking I was infertile. Of a woman's days, I haven't had one in a long time. I thought it was all the nerves. And now I'm nauseous. What if? Emily dressed quickly, threw on her jacket, and ran outside. She rushed to the nearest drugstore and bought what she needed, then took a pregnancy test at home. The minutes of waiting dragged on endlessly. Finally, the test showed the result. First one bright pink line, followed by another, a little paler. Emily took the test with trembling hands and stared at it for a long time. Really, she said aloud. It's a mistake. But in her heart, she knew there was no mistake. All these years she had lived in the certainty that she could not have children. And the reason, it turns out, was not her. It was the doctors. They all said there was nothing to be done. And analyzers in front of her face waved that the probability of conception is 0. It was a lie, a terrible misunderstanding, a ridiculous mistake. No one had even bothered to check that something was wrong with Alex. Emily frantically grabbed the phone. Her hands were shaking and wouldn't listen. She calmed down and wanted to dial Justin, but changed her mind. She turned on the camera, took a picture of the test, and just sent it to her favorite person. She didn't wait for a response. She already knew everything would be fine. Amber considered herself as much a part of these places as the dry air that smelled of wormwood, or the huge stones that broke through from the walls of an ancient fortress. Where else? On these stones. She'd been born here, true, not really, but closer to the sea. But their family had moved to this small town when Amber had just started walking. And in 18 years, the girl had become flesh of his flesh. It was a purely female family. No, of course, her grandmother had once had a husband, but Amber no longer remembered her grandfather. He had died long ago, before she was born. She had a father, too. And he was the one she remembered, and she loved him very much. But he couldn't find a job that would allow his family to live in relative poverty. So he took a job as a shift worker, flying across the country every month, far beyond the Rocky Mountains. Mom began patching holes after years of being broke. The family needed everything from new bedding to replace dilapidated ones to coats and boots for growing Amber. Dad loved the West. He told stories of bright summer nights casting tin, of funny coyotes, of moss falling underfoot in the swamps when he went huckleberry picking. But Dad had not only found his place in life, he'd also found a soulmate, someone named Lauren, who worked for him as a cook. He never came back with Lauren. Lauren had her own apartment in Sacramento, and out west, they were given a room in a dormitory for shift workers. Her father continued to send money for Amber, probably most of his Western earnings. Amber didn't want to touch them. Some call it adolescent maximalism, others call it the kind of mental purity that only comes from youth. Amber demanded the transfers be sent back. She didn't want to be tied to this man from the moment he cheated until the end of her days. The blow was stronger, for she was very attached to her father. The only daughter, used to thinking she was the most favorite. Her mother was lost, looking from Amber to her grandmother for guidance. If Amber wanted to mentally picture her mom, the first thing that came to mind was her always scared and unsure look. "You don't want the money, don't take it." "You're right," Grandma said calmly, and made a sign to her daughter. "Temmie, leave her alone." "I know it's going to be hard on Mom." Amber knew what her family was thinking. "I'm going to work. There are different ways to live." "Better, worse," Grandma said. "We'll adjust." But remember about Mom, she has poor health. When the women were alone, Grandma told her daughter, make an account in Amber's name and put the money in that account. We'll get by somehow. The girl's conscience will be clear. If she wants to someday, and will return to his father every penny, and you can safely look into the eyes of John. Sometimes husbands tell their ex-wives they're living off their alimony. And if, God forbid, I die, that money will come in handy for Amber when she's an adult. Amber didn't know about the second part of the plan and stoically accepted the fact that their little family had the bare necessities. Her mom worked at the library, and she loved books so much that she sometimes brought them back from the dumpster. That was a trend lately. People threw away books, sometimes their own, sometimes inherited from the older generation. After all, anything could be found on the internet. Why clutter up the house with dusty tomes? Mom brought books in dirty bags, or just holding them to her chest. Their own library had grown so large that some of it had moved into the guest house in the garden. But the library paid pennies, and my mother wrote term papers and theses for students in the evenings. Behind each work was a specific goal. Things were bought the cheapest, and still ahead loomed a long list of things that could not do without, and every item on that list was a mom's sleepless night. Amber was used to not asking for anything for herself, not even a refill at the table. Too often lunch was cooked for 2 or 3 days. But the girl early had to think about how to adapt her hands and head to some business. At first, Amber helped her grandmother, twiddling her thumbs. If you compare the family to a ship that sails on the sea called everyday life, then Mom could not be called the captain. She wouldn't rise above a diligent sailor. And when my father left, Grandma took the bridge, and Amber became her right hand. Whether it was standing at the stove, peeling apricots, ironing curtains, Amber uncomplainingly learned and did everything. Though her nature asked for something else, and she was not a diligent learner. Even when her father lived at home, Amber realized happiness it is when after an early breakfast, snapped out of the house, all the paths are yours, and with the sky you can be alone. And there is so much strength inside you that you perceive as an unfortunate misunderstanding the impossibility to spread your arms and fly to be swayed by warm winds. It was from her father that she got her love of vagabonding. And he also taught his daughter that when you can, all day long you are satisfied with a piece of bread taken from home. As long as it was sprinkled with salt when you memorize the road so that you will never get lost and come back, wherever you have wandered. When you don't pay attention to fatigue, to pains in your legs, and you can walk as long as it takes, if it's worth it. And it was worth it. Amber wasn't looking for beautiful, picture-perfect views like the others. She wasn't taking selfies. She wasn't seeking out some of the youth's favorite pastimes. At first, there was simply not enough money for that, and then the girl began to feel like a white crow among her peers and did not even try to become her own in the pack. She simply did not know and could not discuss what they knew and loved. And what touched her, frightened her, amazed or delighted her, left them completely indifferent. I know what you want to be, Valerie, a classmate who sat at the same desk with Amber and with whom Amber had a more trusting relationship than with the other kids, once told her. You want to drive field trips. This happened after the teacher assigned them to write a trivial essay about the love of their homeland. Amber was choking on the topic. There was so much to tell. She was steeped in legends as much as her hair was steeped in sea air. She wanted to talk about everything, and about her favorite gorge, near which a robber had once kidnapped a girl, and she, not resigned to her fate, became a mermaid, and about the valley, where long shadows from the rocks of bizarre, sinister figures come to life in the last hour before sunset. The rocks are motionless, and the shadows fluctuate, reaching out to each other, as if talking, gesturing without words, and about the stone, which fulfills wishes, but charges a terrible price for it. It was impossible not to mention. I read it. The teacher said to her the next day, "Tell us, I want the boys to hear it too. Tell it in your own words, maybe add something else." And instead of English class that day, the class listened to Amber. Among the children were those who went abroad with their parents every summer, or even Christmas vacation. But now they were enthusiastically questioning the girl. Where is that? Have you been there yourself? And how to get there? Do wishes really come true? That's when Valerie dropped out, tucking her textbooks into her bag. You're probably going to be a tour guide, Amber. You're a genius. When she was still in high school, she got a job at a museum complex. There were tons of them. They hired her as a curator. That meant serve, take, get out for herself, for that guy, and for the cleaning lady. And then she started leading tours. First in the low season, when it's not too crowded, then with other, already experienced women. And now she had her own page on the internet, and on the author's excursions, which offered Amber, signed up in line. She bought a car, the loan for which she had to pay off until the second coming. And she took people to places the guides rarely went, unless they were desperate amateurs. Mostly her clients were families or young couples who were no strangers to romance. And many people asked enthusiastically at the end of the tour, "Don't you take them to the fortress?" Amber never took anyone to the fortress, although for a long time it was a very popular route. Until someone upstairs decided that it could be dangerous for tourists. Stones crumble, and sometimes whole blocks collapse from the fortress walls. Cave vaults collapse. It would be good to reconstruct, but there was no money for reconstruction, of course. And the excursions became illegal. They were offered as part of other routes in the vicinity. The guide tempted, "Let's pay a little more per nose and go to the most extraordinary place we have in our neighborhood." But Amber never took anyone to the fortress. It was her sanctuary. Jerry realized he had been cruelly played. He was barely alive, you might say, after a worsening ulcer. When he'd been seized that night, none of the household had thought it was that serious, or, one might even say, that bad. But Lisa did not want to long to look at the suffering of her husband. Jerry was lying in the fetal position, afraid to move, so as not to become more painful, and called an ambulance. Everyone thought that the matter would be limited to drips and hospitalization for a week. At the very least, surgery. But Jerry wasn't getting any better. The tests didn't seem to show anything critical. But the surgeon took him to the table, rather guided by intuition, which has and will continue to help real doctors. And in the process it was discovered that from the smart devices, it turns out, something can escape. And it was hard to take Jerry away from death. He came hard from anesthesia, and for several days even the strongest drugs did not significantly alleviate his suffering. The head nurse was particularly warm to him. She was the one who came up with the idea of letting Jerry sleep at all costs, because sleep is health. She persuaded the doctor to add sleeping pills to the prescribed medication. It probably wouldn't have had much effect on anyone else, but for Jerry it worked wonders. The pain was greatly reduced. He felt in himself that fracture, after which began, though slow, long, but still the way to recovery. And then his many friends came up with the idea to play his wife, which they could not stand too much. Lisa was in love with herself. And what's worse, after getting married, Jerry, who before that knew every dog in town, began to behave much more withdrawn. Now Lisa was deciding where they would go and whether they would go at all, who to invite to visit and in front of whom to close the door, and so on. When Lisa complained to her husband that she cannot tolerate women, so she does not get along in any team, for her coquetry, felt that they do not like me, because I am prettier than them, and because you carry me in your arms. But there were enough men on whom Lisa not only did not make any impression, she annoyed them. Usually too much manners, fixated on themselves, accustomed to being served. Lisa usually visited her husband after visiting hours were over. She and Jerry had a goodwill at the hospital, and once again Lisa was demonstrating that she was different. She didn't fill her bag with cans of hot food, she brought only fruit and water, sitting by her husband's bedside like a graceful butterfly. As she thought herself, a viper, as others thought. The prank the Powells had planned turned out to be cruel not only to Lisa, but to Jerry himself. But when they had conceived it, it had seemed so successful that the friends, as they say, had balked at the consequences. Without difficulty, they found a smashing girlfriend of one of them who agreed to play the part. They asked the same head nurse for a white coat on some pretext. One of the friends was on duty in the corridor, waiting for Lisa to arrive to give the signal. Jerry was asleep in his room. He had gotten his sleep in his sleeping pills early today, and Lisa, entering the room, caught a wild picture. The nurse was wearing almost nothing, only a conventional white robe on her shoulders. She was sitting in front of her husband, in a pose that the young woman found the most obscene of all possible, legs spread, showing off her charms. The nurse was holding a plate of omelets, scooping them into a spoon and clearly about to feed Jerry. The friends knew Lisa's character well enough to calculate how she would behave. The woman didn't squeal, didn't throw a tantrum. She simply dropped her bag and stormed out of the room. A few minutes later, one of the buddies came out, smiling. The scene gave him pleasure. Let her feel for once not like a queen, but take the place she deserves, a bitch in her own right. Lisa hadn't shown up at the hospital since. When Jerry called, she hung up, and when he was discharged, he had to move back in with his parents. He hoped temporarily. Sooner or later, he and Lisa would reconcile. She didn't even notice I was asleep, Jerry lamented. They'd chosen a pose so she couldn't see my face. Except that sister's a stripper, for crying out loud. I had no idea what the bastards were up to. I call them up, and they're laughing their asses off. You should thank us for saving you from that snake. At least we gave you a break. It'll kill you. Jason listened to Jerry's wailing and went about his business. Maybe that's why Jerry came to him. He knew he'd be listened to, but not ridiculed, judged, or bombarded with advice. Jason lived a hermit's life. If it could be said of a man who didn't live in a cave or a hut, whose apartment was on the top floor of a 5-story building, a 2-bedroom in a Khrushchevka on the edge of a big city, and then the private sector began. From the balcony you could see the river. There was a bus ring curled up near the house. There was a mini market and a few stores. Jason would come down here to get groceries, and when he decided to buy what he needed, he'd go back upstairs almost immediately. But sometimes he'd still take a walk to the river. The old houses had long ago pushed the 2- and 3-story mansions away from the embankment, and there was only one way to get to the shore, past the high fences that kept out the elite from the nobility. Jason walked without realizing he was walking like a prisoner with his hands behind his back, standing by the water for long periods of time. Even if it was windy and damp, the Mississippi was cold just to look at. Sometimes he took a different route and went up into the mountains. It was a short walk to them, just a couple of streets, and here he was at the foot of one of them. And a paved road serpentine led to the top. It was used to take children to the camp every day. There was a mast on the mountain. There was also a radio and television station. The serpentine lengthened the way a little, but it was not worth going straight ahead. There were vipers on the slopes when it was warm, and he had to be careful not to step on one. None of Jason's friends lived like him. They considered him a crank, but agreed that perhaps his profession required it. Jason wrote books. Those who had known him for years said that he had been different before, a romantic with a wanderlust, an athlete who had achieved a lot. A man who was open-minded, even overly so. And Jason had met his Emily on one of his camping trips. Both of them were the kind of reckless people that old songs talk about. The old compass is calibrated, the maps and edges are obtained, and to storms like avalanches, the treacherous trail, happy to whom the pinching feeling of the road is familiar, but where the wind tears horizons and blows the dawn. Jason brought the girl to his town right after that hike, straight from the Appalachians. They'd rented a room, then inherited the apartment, which Jason had never changed since. And for the few years he and Emily lived here, their house was open to everyone. There wasn't an evening when friends didn't gather, and even the neighbors would come over to listen to guitar songs and say, "You guys don't need a TV." Jason was writing his second book at the time. The first was well received, and it gave him confidence that the path is chosen correctly. You just need to go and go on it, every day marking the right number of steps. Well, that is lines. Jason went to the sea to finish the novel, and Emily, of course, went with him. It was already low season, and prices were down, so it was hoped that it would be possible to live by the sea for a few months. Money was still tight. But in late October, Jason returned home to bury Emily. The young woman's death had been a tragic accident, but even among her closest friends, no one knew anything for sure. It seemed that Emily had crashed after falling from a height, either during an excursion or during an outing with her husband in the mountains, or maybe on the rocks. It was believable. The boys were not particularly careful, and they'd had all sorts of adventurous adventures before. Emily was buried in a closed casket. Jason hadn't notified anyone about the funeral. Whoever found out by chance showed up, and it was immediately apparent that Jason had changed dramatically. He was silent, as if he had water in his mouth, hardly answering questions, ignoring condolences, and apparently wanting to be left alone. Well, grief affects everyone differently. Some people go to people to cry on someone else's shoulder, and some people don't want to expose the bleeding wound in their soul. Eventually, they got rid of Jason, gave him a chance to live the life he now wanted, and he craved privacy. From then on, he spent most of his time in the apartment, allowing himself nothing but occasional walks. But he still wrote books. True, they had changed. If before they were novels, twisted plot, where the adventures of the heroes did not give the reader an extra breath, then now Jason apparently was not capable of such a thing. Once he was fond of biathlon, took places in competitions, and now wrote stories about sports in the style of realism, with knowledge, but not so exciting anymore. before he had a rifle for biathlon and excellent skis. When he gave up sports, he sold it all, but later he bought a gun again, an expensive hunting rifle. Now it hung over his bed at home. It was probably the most valuable thing in the house. "What do you need it for?" John asked him one day. He went to his friend's house more often than anyone else. Jason hadn't completely closed the door on his old friends, and everyone knew they could come to him and ask to stay for a few days. For example, if there was a family quarrel. And now John was practically living at his place. You don't go hunting anyway. You say you can't kill anyone. Jason looked at his friend without a smile. Maybe I'm just saying that. Or was it before? John was confused. He didn't know whether to take it as a joke or as. There was something about Jason's look that. Until now, he'd been sure that his friend was incapable of raising a hand against anyone. Now all he had to do was break the awkward pause and turn the conversation to something else. Well, that was easy. "How am I supposed to make up with Lisa?" John asked wistfully. "She not only does not want to talk to me on the phone, but also does not let me home." It was clear to everyone Lisa wants to be begged for forgiveness. But in her heart, she's also afraid that John won't have the patience. She's walking the line. In her version, John should demonstrate such a degree of remorse and beg for forgiveness in such ways that it becomes legendary among mutual acquaintances. But there's another option. John could give up and find someone else. Then Lisa, too, will have to start her life from scratch. And there's nothing worse for her. "I don't understand," Jason said. "What are you worried about? Is Lisa alive? That's the most important thing. And the rest." And he waved his hand. So John stopped talking and couldn't say anything else. Amber had a piece of jewelry in her left ear, an earring. For some reason, a single, small ruby drop. It had been threaded in her lobe for as long as Amber could remember. The earring was discreet, and Amber hardly ever thought about it, except once, when she decided at 13 to really pierce both ears and put earrings in. Girls that age have a tendency to want nothing more than earrings in their ears at a certain point in their lives. "Okay, let's go to the beautician." Mom agreed when Amber couldn't resist telling her what she wanted. "And for your birthday, I'll give you earrings gold. Of course I cannot, but silver." "I'll take this one off." Amber picked up a red droplet with her fingernail. She'd lost her pair anyway. "I'm like a pirate, wearing it in one ear." "No, Mom and Grandma," exclaimed at the same time. "Why? Is there something I don't know? Is this some kind of family legend? Do you cherish Sergei as a memory?" Amber looked from one woman to another, and she could feel her loved ones hesitating to tell her anything. "Just put it on and consider it a fairy tale," her grandmother added. Amber's eyes lit up. Scary tales were her favorite thing in the world. She'd read them all at the children's library, and she loved the ones with the lions, mermaids, and sorcerers more than the funny stories about girls and bunnies. When you read such things, at night you dare to go out of your room to the toilet, only if you light up the light in the whole apartment. And if some mysticism lives in their family's history, how did their loved ones hope to keep anything from her? Inga's mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone was going to let it slip, it would be her. But Antonina only averted her eyes. "Yes," Grandma had begged. "Let's hope that everyone has already forgotten everything," said Inga's grandmother. "Does this thing bother you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And remember that you don't need to know everything." "But it's my ear." "We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Mom sighed. She caught her grandmother's glance, stopped talking half a word, and as if cut off. No matter how much Inga pestered her, her mother never said a word on the subject. And only much later, having resorted to the unworthy technique of eavesdropping, Inga at least roughly understood what the matter was. Mother often came to her grandmother's house to sit up before going to bed. No matter how tired she was, but to talk, to discuss what had happened during the day, to complain about something, to ask for advice, it was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit down next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the fragments of these whispers that Inga learned the story. Once in that old fortress on the mountain lived the rulers of the area. Imagine that. Where now only the wind walks through empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, not even ruins, and all the stones have been scattered. There used to be life. And thousands of people walk daily along the roads paved with stones. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. and the master of these places had unlimited power. His house should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress, blank walls, windows only in the courtyard. Was the largest and stood on the edge of the cliff, and inside. It was known, but no one could tell you about it in detail. There were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who had angered the master, or prisoners whom he hoped to exchange for a favorable exchange, were imprisoned here for 20 years. As the years passed, the fortress ceased to play its role. There was no need for people to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer and fewer inhabitants. It was a kind of a test to climb the mountains every day, to live near the sky, but to save water for everything else, to go down to the valley for every little thing. There remained old people and those who are faithful to tradition, who want to die close to their native hearth and be buried in the old cemetery next to their loved ones. There came a time when the master's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years, they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something among them. There was something about the old lords. All members of the clan continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom the land belonged, along with all the people living on it. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but really rules, who decides the question of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then Inge was about 5 or 6 years old, and she liked such outings very much. Though her family did not make them very often, there was always either work or not enough money. But several times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for a whole day to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy the favorite places, have lunch somewhere in a cafe, wander through the stores where they sell what they do not have in their town, and come home at nightfall to both mother and grandmother. And if any mysticism lived in their family's history, loved ones hoped to keep something from her. Mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone had let it slip, it was her. But Emily only averted her eyes. "Let's hope everyone's forgotten," Jacob's grandmother pleaded. "Is that thing bothering you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And remember, you don't need to know everything." "But it's my ear." "We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Mom sighed, catching her grandmother's gaze. She stopped talking halfway through the conversation, and just like that, she was cut off. No matter how much Amber pestered her, Mom never said another word on the subject. It wasn't until much later, when she resorted to the unseemly trick of eavesdropping, that Amber realized at least roughly what was going on. Mom often came to Grandma's house to sit up before bed, no matter how tired she was. Talking, discussing what had happened during the day, complaining about something, asking for advice. It was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the scraps of those whispers that Amber learned the story. The rulers of the area had once lived in that old fortress on the mountain. To think where now only the wind walks the empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, even the ruins, and those are scattered on the stones, before there was a boiling life. Thousands of people walked the stone-paved roads every day. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. And the master of these places had unlimited power. His house, which should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress with blank walls and windows only to the courtyard, was the largest and stood on the very edge over the cliff. And inside, it was known, but no one could tell about it in detail, there were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who angered the master, or prisoners, whom he hoped to exchange favorably, were imprisoned here for 20 years. Over the years, the fortress ceased to play its role. People had no need to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer inhabitants. To live near the sky, but to save on all other water, to go down to the valley for every little thing, it is a kind of a test. There remained old people, and those who were faithful to tradition, who wanted to die close to their native hearth and be buried in the old cemetery next to their relatives. There came a time when the host's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years, they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something of the former rulers in the family. All of them continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom this land together with all the people living on it belonged. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but truly rules, who decides matters of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then. Amber was about 5 or 6 years old, and she loved such outings, though the household did not make them very often. There was always work or not enough money. But a few times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for the day, to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy their favorite places, eat lunch in a cafe, wander through the stores that sell things they don't have in their town, and with darkness falling, return home to their mother and grandmother. That day couldn't help but stick in the memory. Amber was wearing a light blue plaid sundress. She was already badly tanned, her blonde hair tangled by the wind. The beach was less crowded than usual. The wind, carrying sand in the face, scared away the vacationers, and the waves on the sea had risen. But Amber ran along the edge of the shore, once on the ankle ran into the water, then retreated so that the wave did not cover her head, then snatched out of the water some particularly brightly colored pebble. Even her mother, who was far from any creativity, was admiring her daughter at this moment. If there was an artist or photographer here now, he would definitely admire how good Amber was. The girl didn't know that another couple was watching her father and son, who were in a tent nearby. Not everyone could afford to rent a beach house, so most of the tents were empty. But on this windy day, the father and son were more comfortable with the brightly colored fabric protecting them from the flying sand. Look, said a boy of about 12, pointing to Amber. There was something haughty in his oriental appearance and mannerisms. Her father looked at the girl and raised his eyebrows questioningly. So, well, you choose who you like, the boy explained. And don't tell me that's not true. I'm not a little kid anymore, I know. Who told you what? Father asked nonchalantly. Yes, I know about the girl who jumped out of the window and crashed, too. Father stretched, put his hands behind his head and said, looking at the sea. Well, you see, our wishes don't always end well. But that's for you. It's different for me, the boy objected. The father grinned. Son Emir was the only person who could speak to him like that. No, he hadn't been brought up in the Oriental way, where a child is allowed to do anything until a certain age. Emir knew his turns, knew how to behave properly if he had to. And yet he had no fear of his father, and deep down he was sure that he would go much further than him. Every now and then it would come out. Did you like her that much? I don't think she was pretty, Emir asked. How much do you understand? There was no embarrassment in his father's voice. He was just uncomfortable with the story. Well, you chose that one, and I choose this one. I like her. What are you going to do with her? Nothing for now. Let her live. When she's old enough, I'll take her back to our place. You're like a Turk. They used to kidnap their brides. My father's tone was mocking, but there was genuine warmth in it. I think it was more slaves, the boy said, surprised. Amber had been running up and down the beach, and now she wanted to swim. She was already pretty good in the water, but since her father wasn't with them, her grandmother made her wear a child's inflatable vest that fastened in the front with a drawstring. Amber ran to beg for permission to swim and was animatedly telling her grandmother something, gesticulating. Paul, his father, called to the gray-haired man who always accompanied them. He immediately bent down to his master. Do you know who they are? From their appearance, it seems that if they have come, they have not come from far away. Yes, Herman Yefimovich. We'd like to secure the girl for the future, so to speak. Pavel didn't point directly at Amber, but made a certain movement with his eyes. I see your point. Emir smirked. He realized that he had allowed himself more than usual, had behaved even brazenly, and was quite sure that his father would refuse him. But he had chosen a good day, and his father was in a good mood. And in general, it doesn't hurt to check the boundaries of permissible from time to time. Grandma and Mom were shocked when Paul and the makeup girls from the beauty parlor showed up at their house in the evening. Chewing gum in her mouth, one of them pierced Amber's ear and stuck an earring in it. The maiden, however, was apparently not evil. She chatted with the girl and said that they bring 2-year-olds to her, and in general there is nothing to talk about. 1, 2 and done. That earring is very pretty. It's a stone. Ruby, the stone of love. And it has a tiny little seal on it, that you can see if you look closely. The family tried to be indignant at first, to say that it was out of the question, but Paul repeated twice something that frightened everyone, and hinted that misunderstandings with this man could end badly. After all, taking Amber away now is the easy part, and there's little the police can do to help to everyone. The girl will just go missing. It happens, and trying to hide or take her away isn't an option either. If you get the urge, they'll get you from under the ground. Don't cry. Humanly speaking, I understand. I'll tell you what, no one will touch you now. Live as you have lived, raise your little girl. So much that all this will be forgotten quickly, and no one will ever remember you or that earring. But for some reason they put it on Try Not to Cry. Mom, who was scared out of her wits, wiped away her tears with the palm of her hand. Paul shrugged. Well, what can you do when you're talking about a child? A ring or a bracelet? The baby is growing, the jewelry will quickly become tight. She'll lose the tip. An earring is a reliable thing. Did the slave owners think so too? Grandma put it in. Her voice was creaky for some reason. Stepfather Paul looked at her carefully. Well, you got it right. Once again I say, I'm almost certain that everything will be fine. With that he bowed out. That's the phrase the relatives clung to. If you sit quietly, do not try to fight, argue. If you do not get on the road, and look, it will pass. And it was hard to imagine a quieter life than the family led in the following years. Their town is small, less than 30,000 people live here, and it's 24 kilometers from the sea, so even in the summer there is no such pandemonium as on the coast. Mostly those who are interested in history come here. After all, on the maps of this place appeared in the 16th century. And there are plenty of real antiquities here. Caves along the lawn, in the mountains and rocks, where the first settlers huddled so densely that in some places the slopes of the mountains resemble honeycombs. But if you don't go where the tourists take you, the town is quiet and sleepy. Narrow streets, blank stone fences. That's the fence Amber grew up behind. And then when she reached out to people herself when she started working at the museum, the terrible incident was somehow forgotten and erased from her memory. It's been too many years. It's definitely forgotten now. Amber and her red mark. Her mother secretly followed the fate of the owner, knew that he lived abroad for several years. And when his father came back, his son was still out there somewhere. Yes, he studied in Europe. Mother knew that the master's distant ancestors had once owned a fortress, and now he had built himself a house, before which the old fortress was only a pale reflection, a real castle on the seashore. And grandmother used to say that he sits there, God forgive him, like a spider to which the threads of everything dark, gloomy, illegal in their land are drawn. And the guy eventually came back. Why? Why wasn't he in Europe? His father had decided to gradually bring him up to speed, to hand over the reins of power. I just hoped Amber never met him. Amber would take the guests in her old car. Usually the less discerning ones would agree, and she'd drive them around the sights. Or her clients did not agree to drive anything but their own foreign cars. And then in the agreed place sat in their car, and then already took on the role of a guide. Today's job was a little more unusual than before. She had to pick up these guys right at the station. They'd arrived in a matter of days. Sports competitions, a tight schedule, and they wished for such a program. They'd get off the train and go on a tour. And then it's back to the hotel. What's Amber's main concern? That the group was small. As always, she never took more than 4 or 5 people, usually less. And the money had already been transferred to her card. So she stood on the platform and watched the cars slowly pass by. She recognized her clients at once, 3 young guys. One look at them and immediately diagnosed them as basketball players, and an older man with them. Even his whiskers are graying. The guys must have been inspired by the fact that their guide was such a young girl. But Amber, with a restrained smile, responded to the jokes at the attempted flirting, and then she got everyone in the car so that the oldest in the group was next to her in the front seat. The part of the road ahead was boring, through the steppe. Sometimes cab drivers ask passengers to talk to me, or I'm afraid I'll doze off at the wheel. But Amber was in no danger of that. After all, there were the steppe yaks and their battles, their chiefs, their mounds. Even here she managed to tell fascinating stories, poured the bird, and listened that tourists almost sighed with regret when the sea showed in the distance. After all, that meant the end of the story. She spoke to herself, looking in the mirror at the man sitting next to her. He reminded her of an elephant. Maybe it's called a Roman profile. But it seemed to Amber that his forehead went so smoothly, without curves, into his nose that it looked like a short elephant trunk. Amber thought back to last winter. She'd gotten lucky with an order then. She'd patronized a group flying in from St. Petersburg like chickens, and they hadn't wanted to let her go. They asked her to celebrate New Year's Eve with them at one of the most luxurious recreation centers. This, in addition to the fee for excursions. Those days were strange. Here, in their climate, where it rarely snows, it happens that you cannot wait for the whole winter. But then the New Year's week was snowy, and tourists did not know what kind of entertainment to think up. They skated on the artificial ice, and the bathhouse, that's for sure, and the equestrian club, and some even ordered a helicopter. And of course the New Year's celebration itself, when in a cafe stylized as a Russian terem, set the tables and until morning was to continue the fun and dancing. And Amber then ran away. She served her part with the band all evening in the arena and escaped to the cottage where they had put her up. One of the guests went after her. It was a dark-haired, pleasant, middle-aged man. He brought champagne and brought no hindsight. It was just that he was an introvert and didn't want to spend the rest of the night in a crowd. Better to sit in the living room with this nice girl, look at the fire in the fireplace and through the panoramic windows at the snow-covered, garland-lit forest, drink champagne and talk. Igor was married and regretted that it turned out so that his Olga could not come. Suddenly swamped with things at work, and the vouchers were already bought, and Olga kicked him out to rest for 2. And that's when Igor told Amber, "I think that every person is like some animal. And you? I'm like a dog, I guess." From Amber's point of view, he looked like a raccoon, short in stature, graceful, with deep-set and dark eyes. But Amber had remained silent out of politeness. But now she remembered him, because elephant was a very subtle definition. This time she drove the guests around almost until the evening. She showed them the main resort town. The local nice went aboard a sailing ship with them. It used to be filmed a lot in movies, but now it was a bar. They stood on the observation decks, drank water from the spring, drowned in legends, and bought as a souvenir burlap bags with fragrant herbs. The final point was a restaurant where they served fish that was still swimming in the sea in the morning. She was treated to local wines. Then Amber had to take her guests to the doorstep of the hotel. She didn't drink much wine, but the guys got pretty drunk. They felt like they were friends forever. And they asked Emily to come cheer them on at the competition tomorrow. "Can I ask you a favor?" the older man asked. Amber recognized him. His name was Jason, and he wasn't a coach or some kind of chaperone, just a friend of one of the boys' fathers, and he'd come along for the ride. She raised her eyebrows at him now, smiling welcomingly, but she really didn't like these unexpected requests. There was no telling what would pop into her head. "Amber, don't you take me to the fortress?" Kyle interrupted, and after the third drink he decided to switch to you with her. "No, I can't go to the fortress." "Why not?" Kyle's voice trailed off. You had to listen to him to make out the words. "Grandmother won't let me go." Kyle looked at her in amazement. "It's dangerous. Caves crumbling. Underground mazes. She won't let me in." "Well, what do you want?" Amber explained. Like her, Jason hadn't had much to drink that night. "There's a Gregory Evans living here. He's the landlord." Jason began slowly, "and they say he's built himself a castle that would make an English queen jealous. I'd like to take a closer look at it. I understand about private property and all that. But will you take me to a place where I can get a good view of the castle? I know it's over the top, but I'll pay." Amber stopped the car where few people would. Only someone who knows every rock, every ledge in the area. The road was narrow. A steep slope to the left, the sea below. Here, a dense forest. But at the sight of it, Amber remembered the marshes. The green and lush crowns gave the deceptive impression of a carpet. It looked like moss from afar, but you couldn't step on it. You'd fall through. Onto the right rose steep cliffs. Such cliffs can be climbed only with mountaineering equipment. No stranger would park here. But Amber found a small ledge. She parked her car so it wouldn't get in the way of anyone driving by. It wasn't a busy road, though it led to nowhere, to a small village with no sights, nothing of interest to tourists. "Here," Jason started, "I'll show you the path." Amber led him to a little noticeable path that went steeply downward but still allowed him to get down to the sea. Divers used to love this place, Amber explained. They used to have a different road so you could drive a car to the water. These guys always have their gear with them. You know, tents, stuff like that. It's a lot of cargo. And then when they built the castle, they blocked the road. There was even a court case in the end. You know, between the people have a right and private property won. Some people tried to give a damn. Mostly not the people who live here, but the people who come here every year to snorkel. The water here is clear, and it feels like you're not swimming, but floating in the blue sky like an angel. Well, someone tried to ride like they used to. True, they chose a time when it was usually quiet early morning, late evening. They hoped no one would notice them. But people invariably stood on the road, guards, you wouldn't believe it, with real weapons, automatic rifles or something like that. All kinds of camouflage on their chests. So we realized it was serious, so we stopped trying. There's still this trail, it's off to the side. It was laid by the most stubborn. There's a forest almost all the way to the sea. You can go down and snorkel. It's a little awkward to climb back, but you can see the castle from there. Jason stared at her for a few seconds. Amber couldn't tell at once what she saw in that look of gratitude, but it was clearly something else. Thank you, Amber. Anything further, he held out the money to her, but the girl only took one of the bills out of his hand. She was always honest about her work and didn't take tips. How will you get out of here? Hitchhike. There's a hitchhiker every half hour or an hour or less, Jason shrugged. It was a small thing to him. Let me wait for you. My mom says the owner's so reclusive because the 90s aren't over for him. No, girl, Jason said softly. It all started earlier, much earlier, and thank you for the offer. But I'd like to be alone, and thank you also for the fact that without you, I wouldn't have found this path. He nodded his goodbye and started down the path, recognizing it for what it was. In some places, he had to hold on to tree roots to keep his balance. Sometimes the path was blocked by ravines, into which one had to descend and then climb down their slippery clay slopes. Really, you had to love diving to come here. Besides, whatever Jason was up to, it wouldn't be worth the delay. It was getting dark soon, and darkness in the south fell quickly, almost in an instant. It must have been about 20 minutes when the shore came into view. The forest had receded, and he saw a narrow strip of large pebbles. He also saw the castle. It rose up on his right hand and seemed to rise out of the sea, though it was built on a low cliff. It was built of stone of gray, but of such a dark shade that now in the evening light the castle seemed black. Some historian, architect, or art critic would have been tempted to argue that the castle was built in accordance with the traditions of the people who had lived here for centuries. It had nothing in common with Gothic and with those castles and palaces that could not protect their owners from enemies but were works of art in themselves. No, the man who built such a thing thought first of all of his own safety. Blank walls, windows as narrow as loopholes, gates as tall as 3 men. How much evil had to be done to be so afraid of retribution? And Jason remembered the morning Emily had disappeared. He sat at his computer early. He worked best in the morning hours. His head wasn't so clear after that. Emily brought him coffee, came up behind him. All he saw was her hand with the inexpensive metal bracelet. She was placing a steaming cup in front of him. Then he felt the touch of her lips on his hair. Emily kissed him lightly. I'm off to the market. Can you believe it's all over? Not even breakfast, she said. Engrossed in his work, he didn't realize until 10 o'clock when he felt hungry. Emily hadn't returned by then. It was unbearably sickening to think of what had followed. Desperate searching and terror in his soul from the first minute. Somehow he had been certain from the beginning that something very bad, terribly bad, had happened that could not be undone. Emily couldn't get lost, couldn't hang out with her friends. She didn't have any friends here either. Go to a movie or go swimming. Trouble happened. Emily was found about 2 weeks later on a beach just like this, by the water. And there was no way of knowing how she could have gotten there. She was lying on the rocks, a broken doll in tattered clothes. And it was only her face that her death had made completely calm. The police, who up to that point had been honestly searching for the young woman, suddenly led further investigation, as if they were certain of the only theory. And it was hardly Jason's fault. You must have had a fight, the investigator insinuated. So she left. She'd taken her own life, as they say. Jason stared at her with shocked eyes. He couldn't even speak, he was at a loss for words. Emily was the most precious thing in his life. What would he be without her? Quite possibly just carelessness. The investigator retreated a little. The grounds here were beautiful. She wanted to get a closer look. The rocks under her feet crumbled, and she took off. Are you saying that right from the market with a heavy bag without saying anything to anyone? Emily went far away to admire the views. And that's not bullshit to you? The investigator shrugged. Well, it's not like a woman can think of anything. It wasn't until later, asking everyone himself, that Jason found a young merchant who told him. I saw Emily being pushed into the car. It happens to us, the trader said, averting his eyes. Usually these women come back after a while. You were just unlucky. From the same man, Jason had learned about the all-powerful owner of this place. It's no use going to the police with this. He's not only got it in his pocket, they're scared shitless of him. And as you know, I wouldn't be a witness. Life, is more precious. You're already attracting a lot of attention. You'll come home one day and his men will tell you to leave immediately, or they'll find you. Just like that, on the beach. Or maybe they won't find you at all. Wrap it up. You can't fight a crowbar, as they say. And Jason somehow knew Emily hadn't been killed. I mean, not literally killed. She'd gotten a minute and either tried to escape but failed or just threw herself from a height. She had never been afraid of heights in the mountains. One had to watch out for others all the time, keep an eye on her. And heights had done her one last favor. It had saved her from something Emily couldn't bear. Jason had taken her advice, but not because he'd decided to accept it, to forgive it, to forget it. It was just that the master's power here was absolute now. An armor in which no vulnerability could be found. But if you wait, if you put your whole life into waiting for your hour, your minute, your one and only minute, that chance would come sooner or later. Amber was waiting for him by the car. She was squatting on her haunches, picking through small stones, looking for clear quartz shards. It was a habit of hers. Let's go, she said, getting up and shaking her palms off her shorts. I knew you'd come out of the dark. I waited. He was genuinely surprised. How could I leave you? And yet the light was almost out. And the first thing Amber did when she got behind the wheel was turn on the headlights. Mom, let's get out of here. I'm scared for some reason. Amber didn't expect those words to come out of her mouth. She'd known about her master her whole life, as long as she could remember. And she'd been to these places near his castle many times. But today this stranger, so strange, so a little like an elephant, by his mere presence stirred her. Now she had a premonition of bad things to come. Like an animal senses an earthquake coming. Her mother had just fed Amber some fried potatoes, poured her some tea, and returned to her knitting. Where are we going? She asked. There was a certain irritation in her voice. She knew Amber must have known that they were trapped and had nowhere to go. There wasn't a penny to spare in the family and no relatives or acquaintances willing to take them in. And how do you leave home? It's the only thing they got. Mom lived here for years without ever leaving. She was afraid of everything. She had never been abroad. She was afraid of foreign passports, a foreign language, incomprehensible money, which was incomprehensible how much it would be in rubles. At the first store, you would be left without a penny. And my mother was afraid of her country, 2 trains with drunken shift workers, airplanes that crashed, pimps at train stations, swindlers and thieves. If I go to my dad's, Amber asked, there's almost a direct train there, with only one change at the very end. Don't even think about it. Mom jumped up. He really needs you. He's already got a son and a daughter. Let him take care of them. I'm not saying move in with him, Amber corrected her mom gently. Just in the same town as him. Maybe he'll give me a job and then I'll get an apartment. I'm an adult, Mom, and you're wrong to say he doesn't want me. He's been sending me money for my birthday all these years, you know it. It's in your book. Grandma looked at Mom with an expression that clearly said, see, I was right, and Mom was embarrassed. But she quickly found a clue. No, 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 no. I'm not letting you on a train across the country. I had an acquaintance, Grandma said melancholically. She was older than me. As a child, she survived in the trenches of Stalingrad. Then she graduated from a fishery technical school and was sent to Sakhalin. She was small in stature, with a point, black eyes, and a big bow in her braid. She traveled with geologists to Vladivostok on a train across the country on the 3rd shelf somewhere, because there were not enough seats. Then by boat to the island, and worked there as a foreman at the combine. Her mother's eyes darted, fingers begging her to stop this conversation. not to lead Amber astray. Amber went to the fortress. It was a kind of place of power for her. The ruins had been closed off from tourists for a while permanently. The risk of accidents had become too great, and the caves and underground passages had to be reinforced to prevent an unexpected collapse. But there was no place in their neighborhood where Amber didn't know the secret paths. Leaving the car at the foot of the hill, she began to climb up the mountain. And the town died out. Here and there remnants of towers, crooked streets half erased by time, a cemetery. Caves, roofed in the rocks, long ago deserted dwellings, debris, stones, dust and ashes, where the eye finds no joy. 2 or 3 families, like shadows, wander among the bare walls, but barracks for them are native hearths and the temple of their fathers. A black car, over which smooth circles, soaring, draws an eagle on the mountain heights. These lines, written long ago, really came to life here, in these ancient walls, although now it was no longer possible to meet even 2 or 3 families here. Amber had spent the night here once. Of course, withheld from her loved ones, not on a bet, and not with a young man. It was just that since childhood she had felt her belonging to this ancient fortress, her kinship with those who lived here. It was well known about her host's ancestors that they owned the very house of which only ruins remained. But Amber knew from somewhere that her great-grandparents had come from this area. Maybe one of them had been a potter or a small merchant who went down to town every day, set up shop. Or maybe there isn't even dust left of their house now. But their souls, they were still here. These people, generation after generation, had survived here, where every drop of water was precious, and where even grass grew so sparsely on the sun-hot rocks. Survived, fought off enemies, and stayed here after the master's family left. Which meant this place was theirs by right, not stolen from them by legal violence. Amber told her friend at home that she'd stay the night, but she went up to the fortress in the late afternoon and found a spot near the crossroads. There were bushes of dried wormwood poking through the paving stones. There was still a stone arch over one of the roads. Nearby were 2 nations' ancient temples. One simpler, smaller, trimmed in wood, the other larger, with heavy columns, with doors that in Amber's memory were perpetually locked, though she peered through the windows, trying to see what was inside. The sunset made the fortress an absolutely fantastic sight, and it was particularly vivid itself. It seemed that Amber had never seen such vivid colors of the sky, rich purples, golds, and purples. It was the hour when that which was unimaginable and fabulous in the daytime awakens all the otherworldly power whose breath is in the air in a way that cannot be put into words. Amber sat here until dawn. At times she was sure she could make out faint light shadows, swift or slow, but she felt no fear. She waited for someone to speak to her, or to give her some sign. Above her head were large stars, like grains of shining salt. Every now and then a long streak of a meteorite could be seen. Amber remembered her childhood. She'd been given a little Umka telescope. And it had been a real shock for her to see for herself, with her own eyes, that the moon was not a golden disk, so natural in the night sky and in pictures that it was almost unnoticeable. No, the moon is a stone ball, riddled with lunar craters. And it hangs in the black void of space. It's one thing to read about it, but it's another to see it. It took her a long time to catch a glimpse of meteors, even though her grandmother had told her, "There's a bright one coming." When Amber finally saw the flying stars, she remembered her father's hands as he struck a match to light a cigarette. And she thought maybe God was doing it up there in the sky. Then her legs got stiff, and she stood up, thinking that every step she took would make a thudding sound on the paving stones beneath her feet. But she walked quite silently, like a spirit, reached the temple and stroked one of the columns. It was a movement of which she was not aware to herself. And then she walked down the alley under the archway, and inhaling the bitter odor of wormwood, thought that this was what the stars smelled like. She did not go down into the dungeon, though she had been there before. But she had not brought a flashlight, and without it she was afraid of tripping on the steps, stumbling, falling somewhere. So she walked outside the fortress walls and went to the tomb, the obelisk above which was particularly high on the mountainside. Amber knew that a very young girl was buried here. She had died while even younger than Amber was now. A girl from a wealthy family had carried water to the fortress during the siege. Skinny as she was, she managed to slip between the bars of the fence. She made the journey again and again with the heavy burden, and her heart failed her. The bird girl. Then Amber met the dawn next to the grave, but there was still no fear. On the contrary, the feeling that she was not alone was growing in her. Of course, Amber never said a word at home about her nighttime escapade. Mom would have been heartbroken, and Grandma would have freaked out in hindsight. But many times after that, Amber had come here in times of need to regain her inner strength and composure. And now she sat in complete silence for a long time on the grass at the edge of the road. Only the wind ruffled her hair and occasionally sang in the narrow streets like the distant sound of strings. Today she was driving a new group, a husband, wife, and 2 children. The family didn't want to buy shared excursions. With children, you can never guess what if they get carsick, have to stop the car, and what if they get thirsty or have to go back. And the program the mother and father asked to adjust to the children. The girl was 8 and the boy was 5. Not tiring, not hot, interesting, and a place to get drunk and eat. Amber took them to the Museum of Fairy Tales and walked with her guests along the paths of the park for a long time, talking about fairy tale characters as well as an experienced guide. She worried while the children wondered and marveled to their heart's content to have their pictures taken. Then they had a snack at the cafe and had to finish the day at the observation deck. We had to give the adults a chance to admire the beauty of the area too. For Amber, the main charm was the sea always alive with its brightest holiday colors, blue, 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 green, and the vegetation still below. Drowning in the greenery of the southern city was very nice. It was a weekday, and this observation deck was not one of the most famous. So when they'd come here, Amber had figured and had no doubt already that they'd be alone on the platform. But at the very last moment they were cut off by a car, a white Cherokee Jeep. It cut them off so unexpectedly and brazenly that it could have been bad. Amber almost drove off the road, and that would have been a disaster. Serpentine roads everywhere, steep slopes everywhere. She felt an icy dread. Not so much for herself, but for the strangers in the car. Damn it. She almost never argued with other drivers, never got into arguments. And though almost always, if something happened on the road, it wasn't her fault. Amber swallowed the chicken that you can't let those women drive and the brainless blonde just as long as they'd leave her alone. But now, when she saw that the Jeep had stopped near the same lot where they were headed, Amber couldn't help herself. She slammed the door and strode toward the black car, taking the distance between them in 4 strides. "Are you crazy?" She lashed out at the guy who stepped on the ground. "Do you realize you almost got us all killed?" And she faltered. Because this Ambo looked at her without the slightest sense of guilt, with such a slight smirk, as if not a person, but a bug he got on the road, which he was about to crush with his foot. And then she recognized him. His portrait was not published in the newspapers, but she often found references to him and his photographs on the internet. Too often the owner's son was involved in all sorts of stories. And usually in a car he'd race with his friends at breakneck speed through the city at night and hit someone, or he'd get into a fight he'd provoked, or there'd be an absolutely scandalous orgy party, for no one had the courage to call it anything else. Resentment struggled with fear in Amber. Especially as it turned out, Emir wasn't traveling alone in the car. He never rode alone, and 2 of his friends of the same age and perhaps even stronger build were now standing beside him, grinning just as unkindly. Amber remembered the earring. She wanted to see if it covered her hair, but didn't dare. She could only hope that the curly blonde strands hid her earlobes, but it was a futile hope. "I remember you," Emir said, ignoring Amber's anger, ignoring her mood. "Were you the one slapping bare heels on the beach back then? You couldn't forget me either. You're still wearing my sign." He looked at her like a landlord coming home to check on his possessions. "You were such a little girl then. I thought you'd never grow up to be anything good. But you turned out to be pretty good." The tourists started getting out of the car. Amber should have gone with them, but she stood stiffly as the owner's son walked around her, looking at her from every angle. Looking at her from every angle. "Where do you live? What do you care? What do you really care? Because you're coming with us now." "I'm not." "Who's going to ask you?" The smirk got even wider. Amber knew it was useless to yell. There was no one around to stand up for her but the father of the family. Still, as she was dragged to the car, she cast desperate glances at the family. Unless these people were afraid, if they could tell. You didn't see anything. One of the customers approached them, after the Jeep door had already slammed shut and swallowed Amber. "Is that clear? But how are we going to get out of here? We don't even know where we are." The man didn't dare say anything, the woman decided. And his voice wasn't shaking. "Shuttle you'll catch. With these words, the guy got into the car and the Jeep sped off so sharply that it almost drove over the tourists' legs. They barely had time to bounce, and a few more minutes coughing because such a dust rose. The adults were so impressed by the experience that they could not immediately begin to talk, although the children, and break them, trying to understand what was happening. It was late in the evening when Amber's mother came to the hotel where the family was staying. She was distraught and found her daughter's notebook, where Amber had written down the schedule of her excursions and the phone numbers of her clients. Only she, this crying woman, not the police, had dared to tell the husband and wife what had happened on the observation deck. But they didn't remember the license plate number, saying they were in shock. They didn't care, and they stood firm on that. They couldn't give us a good description of the guy. A big guy in a black t-shirt with some friends with him. And then they watched through the window as the small figure of a woman, covering her face with her hands, went away. Into the night. "Just don't throw me into a thorn bush," the phrase popped into Amber's head. And it somehow became the only thing she could cling to like a lifeline. They'd been driving for about 10 minutes now. Amber was sandwiched in the back seat between two thugs. She tried to ignore their dirty jokes. She was the only one who needed to scratch out a ghostly chance at salvation. "Are you taking me to the castle?" Amber asked briefly, still ignoring Emir's friends. "Why? Have you wanted to go there for a long time? Really? Not only a tour guide, but also a call girl. I haven't seen all the clients' houses yet." "You haven't." "That's true. You guys don't let anyone in. You're like spiders in a web. But there's always a way out." "And what is your way out?" "I assure you, the gate is like a door to a safe. A flea can't get through. You won't escape, will you?" "There is a way out. I've already escaped through your father's window. I'm not afraid of death. Don't think about chewing through the bars with your teeth." He nodded at her wrist. Something had changed. Almost imperceptibly, but Amber felt it. "Aren't you afraid of anything?" Emir asked. The iron confidence and mockery were gone from his voice. "Why, nothing." Amber spoke in a deliberately harsh tone that she had never spoken before in her life. "I'm afraid of the fortress. They say there are ghosts there in droves. They step on each other's toes. I had a friend stay there for a night on a dare and she nearly went mad. I'm not afraid of that lock thing you've got going on." "Yep, that's a good idea." One of the guys came to life. "It's under reconstruction. None of the people are there. Let's stick her in one of those holes. She'll sit there for a day or two and then we'll take her back. It'll be silk. It's better than if that rabid thing starts gnawing on her own veins. Or your throat." Emir thought for a minute, and then became lively. "Come on, let's do it." He had a premonition of unusual entertainment. There was almost nothing left unavailable to him in this world. He was already satiated. But to shake the family history, for his ancestors had put their enemies, or perhaps captives, in those dreadful caves. It was tempting to do as they did. This fool won't run away. Even if there is a small window in such a cave, it is very narrow. You can't fit through it. And if you turn around, you'll find yourself under a cliff. Then all you can do is throw yourself down, just to be sure. And if that crazy woman throws herself down, no one will ever think anything of Emir. It's not the same old story with Dad. The owner could do almost anything, but it took a lot of money to cover up that old story. And here's a careless girl climbing a mountain and getting killed. It's her own fault. But Emir had no doubt the girl would never get out of those underground passages. Jason bought a hunting rifle, according to all the rules, having collected the documents and having a hunting ticket. But it was not worth looking for it afterward in the company of those who wanted to shoot a bird or kill a boar. Afterward, he laundered the trophies. Sharing tales, Jason retreated into the woods. Loneliness had long been his shadow, his second self, and he'd come back without any booty. He had another goal in mind, to preserve his sniper skills and that inner focus that would so easily be lost in the shooting range. Jason needed that inner determination and willingness to pass the point of no return as much as he needed a steady and accurate hand. He would go far away where no other hunters could get to him, and where no one could hear the sound of the shot. Jason would only shoot at a target until he felt he was ready for anything that might come out of his scheme. All these years he'd spent money on himself more than sparingly, royalties set aside. And by the time it was decided it was time, he had enough saved up to buy a black market sniper rifle. If Amber's mother kept an eye on her master's life, Not for any particular purpose, more out of caution. She sighed in relief when she heard he was leaving the country. Jason, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was waiting for. Even the strongest enemy has a moment of weakness, a moment when he opens up. He had to wait patiently for that moment, not to miss it. When Amber led him to the closest place to the castle, Jason realized once again that it was useless to look for luck here. The castle was too far away from people and too well protected. It wasn't worth trying to get to someone hidden behind its walls. There were other options to consider: access roads, places in the city where the owner occasionally visited. Jason knew he would wait patiently, that he would lay his life on it and wait. After all, what would happen to himself afterward was of no concern to him. He didn't think about the consequences, and frankly didn't care about them. But he realized how carefully he had to think over every step, so that his life's work would not remain unfinished. At the hotel, he took a room on the second floor with a low-hanging balcony. It wasn't always easy for an outsider to get onto the front of the building, but it wouldn't be a problem for him to get out of here himself if the need arose. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here, so he'd paid for 2 weeks for now. He'd see how long it would take. He went to the market where Emily had gone on her last day. He needed to get in tune with her. From a common sense point of view, it was inexplicable. But the chance we get often defies all logic. Over the years, the market has become almost unrecognizable. New pavilions and signs have appeared. But this place was revived as early as it is now. Although most of the resort visitors were still asleep, traders were already laying out their goods on the stalls. There had once been merchants in the ancient fortress too, and they had come down every day to set up their shops. Jason remembered that there had been competition then, and he'd been quietly discouraged from taking cucumbers from Peter or apricots from Ahmed. He waters his garden with cesspool waste. Fertilizer, you'll want, he was told. But how could one pass by golden curd, velvety pure apricots, purple grapes, or cucumbers just plucked from the bed? It was impossible to think of anything else but the blissful satisfaction of hunger. Now the early customer was welcome, and the first saleswoman grabbed Jason with her chatter in her hands, which were already placing the clear yellow plums on the scales. But as he counted out the money, Jason froze, listening to the conversation of the women next door with their wares. That's how that girl got stolen and taken away in broad daylight. The mother's ready to go to the noose. Yeah, I know that family. The last thing I thought was that they'd be the ones to get into this kind of trouble. Always so quiet, always the first to say hello when they meet. That girl Amber is either 18 or 19 years old. And why her? Well, she's pretty, I'll give her that. How did you find out? The mother, it turns out, kept it a secret from everyone that her girl had a crush on this boy years ago. Now Amber hasn't come home, and the mother's looking for her, because the police are notoriously unreliable. People who saw it all happen, who saw her being dragged into the car, have come forward. But well, if there are witnesses, will the police let it go this time too? So what witnesses? They all got scared, quickly packed up and left. And now they'll have to find them. And the mothers will say it's all a fabrication, said the full-figured shopkeeper, shifting the apricots so carelessly that the soft sides of the apricots were pitted by her fingers. By God, I think I'm going mad. This is medieval. The master is the Lord. It's always been like that in my lifetime. And it will go on. My son has grown up there, said another. And what is your mother not afraid to tell now? Isn't it too late for her to realize it? What has she got to lose? The only hope now is that everybody will know about it. Maybe then that scum will be ashamed to go all the way. He'll let her go in the end. After he's played with her, he'll let her go. When did this happen? Jason asked, forgetting about the change the peddler was counting out for him. I found out yesterday, the full-figured woman said. That's the kind of thing we get. You come here like you're in paradise for a vacation, but not everything is so peaceful and quiet. Who can give me the address of this family? Jason asked. Please. Do you want to help one guest? Well, help. They've always lived poor, and Mom's sure going to need the money now. I don't know whether she's at home or in the hospital. How much medicine costs, can you imagine? Tell me the address, I'll remember it. It wasn't 20 minutes before Jason knocked on the gate of the house on the quiet street. The gate was 3 boards, the brown paint peeling off long ago. There was no bell, but even a delicate knock was enough for the unlocked gate to open by itself. Jason followed the path through the garden to the house. 2 women were sitting on the open veranda. One, very old, slouched in a chair with armrests and red eyes. The other, younger, stood toward him, clamping her hands over her mouth, apparently in no doubt what news he had brought. And Jason's heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. It was as if he'd been transported back to the hour he'd learned of Emily's death. Jason raised his palms in a soothing gesture. I didn't bring bad news. I want to learn something and maybe help. But you're not the police, said the younger one, the mother. And there was more affirmation in it than questioning intonation. Jason realized she was already there. Already tried to raise everyone's ears. It didn't work. She'd been told something like, wait, a young girl's been out for 3 days, ran away, decided not to let you know. Now mother and grandmother were hitting this uncertainty like birds against glass. Their hearts were about to fail. I'm not the police, he said, and he could hear the change in his voice. I understand that you know who your Amber is in whose hands, and that this man has had his eye on her for a long time. That is correct. And a picture of your daughter I'd like to see, if I may. The mother shrugged her shoulders shakily. The shawl thrown over them, apparently grabbed from the bed, didn't help. She went quickly into the room and soon returned with a red-bound album, an old album, the kind they used to glue pictures of children from birth many years ago. Her mother opened the album to the last page, stroked the picture of a pretty blonde-haired girl with big, clear eyes. There was nothing of the modern girl in her. She looked like an easy victim who had fallen into the golden hands of Cochet, who would take her wherever he wanted. I'll hire a hitman, mother said. Sell everything we have, this house, everything. And we'll hire someone to kill that rotter at last. Tanya, Grandma raised her voice. The thing to think about right now was how to help Amber. No such thoughts just yet. Mother dropped her head on the table and cried with her grief. That's right, it had all come to pass. It was as if she were standing over Amber's coffin. It was impossible to question her now, and Jason got the story from his grandmother. She, too, had changed in the last 24 hours. If Jason had known her before, he would have seen how she had aged. Now she was an old woman sitting in front of him, immersed in herself, a little crazy. But he didn't know what to say to both of them, because now all he had to do was risk everything, and no one knew what the consequences of his move would be. What can you do for her? Again, it was not the mother who asked, but the grandmother. The mother was still unable to speak coherently. I'll try to find out where she is, and then it will depend on the circumstances. One more question, please. I know this is difficult for you, but I need to know. You know Amber best. If she escaped, where would she go? Would she go back home, or would she try to hide somewhere? Would she run to the police, or would she go far away without saying a word to anyone? Mother raised her head. At these words, she and grandmother exchanged glances. The fortress, grandmother said. It had always been the place dearest to her. A place of strength, as they say. She would run there for comfort, and you can hide there so that no one can find you. It's a veritable underground labyrinth. You know that ancient fortress and the cave city. It's undergoing restoration. But somehow I don't doubt that Amber would run there. Jason closed his eyes a little, signaling that he'd taken note. Why don't I go there myself? His mother jumped up. What if she's really gone and is hiding there? I'll go and call. Don't even think about it, he said sharply. Nowhere, not a single step now, so as not to hurt your daughter or yourself. Your job is to wait. Do you realize how hard it is to wait and do nothing? Have you ever been through anything like this, been in our shoes? The last thing Jason would do in his life is tell Amber's grief-stricken relatives about Emily. Because they still had a chance. There was hope. She didn't. Amber really knew the underground labyrinths well. Of course, she couldn't go through all of them. Many of the passages were simply blocked, and no one was going to clear them. Cave vaults were crumbling, their corridors becoming impassable. She was risking everything, too. The company she'd fallen into could do anything to her first. There were no witnesses, and then dump her in one of the stone bags to make her go mad. No water, no food, and utter despair. Or even pushed off a cliff. Then again, who would see? But she was just beaten, tastefully, heartily. And then they pushed her into that death chamber that the tour guides liked to scare tourists with. Apparently, Emir and his accomplices did not know these places so well, and this cave was known to everyone. Some said that they could put a prisoner here for decades, setting a completely insane ransom for him. Others said it was the place of execution. and they described in vivid color exactly how. Now, the narrow entrance was closed by an iron grate, but Emmer, it turned out, had a key to it. He must have inherited it from his great-grandfather. "This is where you'll sit." Amber was shoved back so hard that she couldn't keep her feet and fell to her knees on the stone floor. "Maybe we'll stop by again tomorrow," Emir smirked, savoring every word and trying to catch the look of horror in her eyes. He didn't wait. "The day after tomorrow, then. We have to bring you water, poor thing. But we'll only give it to you if you ask for it very nicely." "Meet us on your knees with your mouth open," advised one of his buddies. Cheeky. Malnourished, covered in rashes. Amber couldn't let her hatred suffocate her now, make her do something rash. She walked to the back of the cave, her cell, settled on the stone ledge, wrapped her arms around her knees, and stared out the window. "Are you getting into character?" Kyle Smith wondered. "Like, go ahead and practice with the ghosts until we get there." They left, laughing, deliberately loudly discussing the next time they'd visit her. What would they do to her then? Amber didn't move until her acute hearing stopped picking up the sound of their footsteps and voices. There was the sound of a car pulling away, and then she caught her breath. Amber stood up and walked over to one of the windows cut into the stone. Rough, irregular squares, just enough to let light into the cave and gauge the thickness of the stone walls. The cave was cold, and it would get even colder at night. Amber knew she didn't have much time. Very little. 24 hours, maybe less, and no one would come here in that time. She didn't even doubt that. She couldn't think about her mother and grandmother going crazy at home. The thought of that was mentally distressing. But Amber couldn't suppress the agonizing feeling of thirst. She'd spent the entire day in the heat. She hadn't eaten since this morning. And then there was the worry. She walked slowly around the cave, examining every stone, tapping her fingers on it, but she couldn't see a glimmer of hope anywhere. The cave had been cleaned just for tourists, so that through the iron grating they could see the manicured walls, not the bare stone and ledge that had replaced the prisoner's bench and bed. And there's a rusty piece of iron sticking out. It must have been used to attach a chain if it was to be put on the prisoner to intimidate him. Night came and brought no relief. Amber's eyes adjusted to the darkness quickly enough. It wasn't complete thanks to the windows. The night was clear, the moonlight walking through the cave from end to end. Amber was cold, but she didn't notice it herself. Her mind, however, seemed ready to boil. She searched again and again for a way out and didn't find it. But far more terrible than the night was the whole of the next day, when, beginning in the morning, she waited every minute for the arrival of her tormentors. She wondered exactly what they had in mind and realized that she had nothing at all, to defend herself. Every sound made her freeze and hold her breath. But they didn't come. Maybe they thought they'd give her a hard time, make her more cooperative. Maybe Kyle was just distracted by other things. By the evening of the second day, the thirst was almost unbearable. Amber thought seriously about the possibility that maybe some moisture would show up on the stone walls at night from the temperature difference and could be licked off with her tongue. There was no way to open the iron grate on the door, no way to dig under it. There was no earth here at all, just rock. The only thing Amber tried was to squeeze through the window. She almost succeeded, but it was the very last step, a desperate move. The only way to get out the window and plummet into the abyss was if there was no other way out and death was preferable. This is my fortress, my place, Amber thought, pressing her forehead against the cold stone. Why the hell can't I do this? Is it really hopeless and these walls won't do anything to help me? She navigated the stars pretty well and fell asleep probably around midnight. But she didn't sleep long, about 2 hours. She woke up when it was starting to get light. It was nearing dawn. But the windows of the cave faced north, and it was still dark, though in the east the sky must have already turned blue. At first she thought she was dreaming, because it couldn't be. In the corner of the cave, in the darkest corner of the cave, stood a girl. She was probably about 10 or 12 years old. Fragile, thin, as if she were just bones, wearing a floor-length cherry dress that seemed to glow slightly. The girl's hair was braided, and she wore a cap like a bonnet on her head. Amber began blinking frequently and even clenched her eyelids, because it couldn't be anything other than hallucinations from nerves and dehydration. The girl walked over to her. Amber realized that if it wasn't a vision of her inflamed brain, she was facing a ghost. But the little visitor was not transparent, only very pale. She picked up a pitcher, and a pitcher she happened to have, and gave Amber a drink. Never afterward could Amber forget drinking that strange water, or rather the mist that flowed from the jug, but it quenched thirst, and more than that. It gave her strength back. Shinika Amber asked quietly, "Is that you?" The girl blinked, just as Amber had done before. She was very small, very sad, and lonely to the point of heartbreak. Maybe it had been centuries since she'd had anyone to visit her, no one to fetch water for her. With inaudible steps, the girl went to the wall and lay down on the very iron that was sticking out of the stone. Nothing happened, but Amber understood her perfectly. 2 steps were enough for her to get next to the piece of metal and do what the little guest had done, lean on it with her chest and arms. The slit that opened in the wall was so narrow it looked like a trap. Step into it, and it would crush you. The girl was no longer behind Amber, but in front of her, somewhere in the dark depths, and there was a faint glow coming from it. And the girl didn't hesitate any longer. She stepped into the cramped corridor and walked, not even walked, squeezed between the walls. Sometimes she had to make an effort to move on. And if something happened here, no one would ever find her. She realized that clearly. Enthusiasm gradually waned. She was going down somewhere, and the way went on endlessly. She seemed forbidden to think about anything. She had to keep going as long as she had the strength. And then, too inwardly, she tuned in to the fact that she would fall in the end. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst outcome. So she was startled to the core when suddenly there was a whiff of fresh night air, and they found themselves in a small cave-like alcove at the very foot of the mountain. They had climbed out. There was the trail that ran down from the fortress. Amber looked around in panic, searching for the girl with her gaze, but no one was near her anymore. Only there, somewhere up on the slope where the girl's grave was, a light flashed for a moment and then went out. Or maybe it was just a star falling. By the end of that first day after Amber's disappearance, Jason knew the license plate numbers of the cars that belonged to the owner's family and his cronies. Amber could have been kept in a castle, most likely where it was even more convenient to hide loose ends, and in case of such a need, literally. And yet there was still some chance that she'd been handled differently, that she was hidden somewhere, and that chance couldn't be dismissed. Jason waited. He had managed to get much closer to the castle unnoticed than Amber had led on. He was almost beside the road, and only a keen eye would have recognized him in the green thicket. The sniper rifle was with him, and he would be in trouble if one of his master's men had spotted him. There was no other way to interpret his behavior than ambush and hunt. It wasn't the eagles he'd chosen to hunt. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here before he learned something, got a clue. But he hadn't left here yet in the late afternoon, and it was already clear that he was going to spend the night. Jason fell asleep with his head resting on the damp forest floor. His hearing was keen, and it was unlikely that anyone would be able to approach him undetected. Jason had no idea that at some point his sleep would become so sound that it would transport him to another dimension, where what he saw was real. He saw a country and a girl, as if coming from the depths of time. The clothing had a purple hue that made it impossible to distinguish the gender in the darkness. It was something like a long dress, the kind you see in ethnographic museums. The girl stepped back, giving him a view of the cave, and there was Amber, sitting on a stone ledge. The panorama shifted, as if a movie camera had decided to film the background. Now the ancient fortress lay before him like a palm of his hand, and it was there that the cave was. The prisoners were in it. He himself looked at it all, lying on the mountainside with a rifle in his hands. It was early morning. A black Jeep was driving down the road below. Jason was awake before dawn had even broken. There was no fatigue, no heaviness in his head. On the contrary, he knew exactly what to do now. He didn't have to decide what was going to happen next. It was as if everything had been decided for him. Children are not responsible for their fathers, but sometimes it is clear from the very beginning that they will surpass them. And would a bullet between the eyes be punishment enough for the master? Suffering measured in moments. But to mourn the flesh of his flesh, the one he nurtured and raised to replace him, it would take years and end with life. It was getting light when Jason reached the town where he'd started on his way to the fortress. It took him another half hour or so to climb up to the ruins of the fortress, and then, climbing higher to the top, to take the place he had seen in his dream. Now the whole road lay before him. Anyone approaching he would see from a distance, and he would have time to take aim. He didn't even make an attempt to find Amber. A different task now faced him. Logically speaking, The owner's son couldn't have gotten here this early. Jason had to cover his eyes to bring his image back to life. Tall, with a fresh, plump face, large lips, clenched fists. A fortunate man who had never known hard work, but was used to taking down the defenseless. So used to it that he didn't even expect his victims to resent him. Only fear was on the faces raised to him in supplication. For a moment, feelings came over Jason. Such mental strife. He lowered his head and breathed evenly to keep from throwing up. Emir couldn't have gotten here earlier, because that fat turkey would probably be asleep before lunch. But Jason had seen his car against the dawn sky in a brief vision, and now he waited. When the murmur of an engine was heard in the distance, all he had to do was move the barrel of his rifle. He was no longer a man, he had become a fearless machine, and all the measurements, calculations were going on as if outside his consciousness. He did not even try to hit the darkened windows of the Jeep. The shot hit the tire. And that was enough. Afterward, Jason stood full length on the mountain, a black silhouette against the dawn sky, and stared at the car that had gone down, flipped over, rolled over twice hard, and finally burst into a tall fire. He had a little time. He knew that the fire would be visible from afar, that it would not be long before people would be rushing here. But he did not try to hide now, even though he should have covered his tracks as soon as possible. He walked toward the fortress because he knew it was the right thing to do. And he was not surprised when he saw the figure of a girl in the distance. She froze, and then slowly began to rise toward him. He had better not meet her, because if he didn't get one chance for luck, they would look for him on the ground and underground. They'd dig deep and they'd find him eventually. He couldn't let anyone suggest that Amber's fate had anything to do with him. Jason had his own reason for revenge, and more than a good one. He didn't believe that the dead forgave everything and everyone, that they didn't care about earthly matters. Jason thought that Amelie was only now truly at peace. He also knew that everything he'd signed up for, sending the car into the abyss, was justified, and that no matter what happened to himself, it was okay, because that girl was alive and would live, and no one would ever hurt her again. And he'd only go near her for a minute to make sure she was safe. Amber was already standing 2 feet away from him, and yes, she was in one piece, but there was blood on her cheek and hair. Jason held out his hand as if asking, "What is it?" "He is, isn't he?" Amber asked, pointing at the chasm. The man nodded. Then she unclenched her palm, which held the ruby earring torn from her ear. Amber wanted to throw it into the chasm too, but the earring flew a few feet away and disappeared into the dry grass.